Chapter 437. At the foot of Qing Yun Hill. That layer of strange dark clouds in the firmament had already dispersed, but the cloud layer was still very thick from the dark sky. Heavy rain was still pouring, scouring this seemingly lonely mortal world. In the wilderness, the wind was strong and the rain was heavy. The chill was bone-piercing. Not long ago, there was an abandoned morgue. After a soul-stirring and intense battle, it had completely turned into ruins. Even the ground under their feet was overturned due to the destruction caused by the huge magic power. After being washed by the wind and rain, it became dirty mud. The sky was dark. There was not a trace of light. In the wilderness, in the wind and rain, there was only a faint blue light, glimmering slightly. Anan, who had always loved cleanliness, her white clothes were already stained by mud, but she did not seem to mind. Not far from her, Tian Bai's body lay quietly. His eyes were closed, so peaceful like he was asleep. The wind and rain hit his face. The sound of sobbing in the wind seemed to be crying. Ghostly still had not woken up. With the faint blue light of Tianya, one could see that his face was as pale as a dead person, and his expression was filled with agony, if not for the slight rise and fall of his chest. One would have thought it was an illusion. Right now, his body was in Lu Sueki's embrace. Tianya quietly glowed at the tiny places around Lu Sueki, and ghostly, it propped up a small gap. An invisible force blocked the raindrops. And not far in front of them, the monkey Xiao Hui also lost its usual liveliness, quietly sitting on the ground. The rain from the sky drenched its fur. From time to time, water droplets flowed past its face and body, dripping onto the ground. A gust of cold wind blew over. Xiao Hui's 3 eyes blinked, seemed to feel the cold, quietly moved closer to Ghostly's body. Anan quietly looked up, glanced at Xiao Hui, and then stretched out her hand, gently carried Xiao Hui into Tianya light, let it lay on Ghostly's body. Xiao Hui looked at Lu Sueki, made soft sounds, and then its head gently drooped down, leaned on Ghostly's chest. Its head turned to the side, its eyes watching not far ahead, Tian Bai's body. Like a dream? Like an illusion. It was like a long and distant dream, but there was no joy at all, because when it came to the end, it turned out to be a nightmare. Ghostly's body moved, the sadness on his pale face deepened. The next moment, following a groan of pain, he slowly woke up. There was a light in front of him, a light blue brilliance that floated and lingered around him. There were sounds all around. It was the sound of wind and rain. The wind blew and the rain battered. Xiao Hui, who was leaning on Ghost Li's chest, suddenly straightened up, looked at Ghostly. The cold wind blew again. Ghostly trembled slightly, and then he saw Anan's gaze, that face as pale as his, in this stormy night, the only person who accompanied him. The corner of Ghost Li's mouth trembled slightly. The pain in his chest had lessened a lot. Ghostly glanced at his chest, saw 7 or 8 pieces of white bandages of different sizes wrapped around his chest, looked like they were torn from his clothes. And right now his consciousness was gradually waking up. Very quickly he realized the broken bones in his chest had all been reconnected. Just that Tian Bai's palm was really not a small matter. His entire body's energy channels were injured. Although Anan had treated him after the incident, but most likely he would need many days of recuperation before he could recover. With that thought, he subconsciously turned and looked, very quickly saw his mentor who had nurtured him until he grew up. Ghostly did not speak. He seemed to not even have the strength to speak. In the storm, Tian Bai's face was splashed with water, quietly lying in the dirty mud. Who knew, after his death, he would be like this? A low hoarse cry came from his throat. Ghost Li's body rolled down from Anan's embrace, landed in the mud, and then struggled to crawl towards Tian Bai's body. Lu Sueki was startled and instinctively pulled him forward. But when her hand touched Ghost Li's body, she heard Ghostly say in a low voice, "Don't pull me." Anan stood dumbstruck, slowly retracted her hand. Her eyes watched Ghostly, followed him all the way, watched Ghostly leave Tianya's halo. Step by step he struggled to crawl towards Tian Bai's body. The storm was merciless. Biting cold came, very quickly drenched his body. Along the way, The muddy mud also splashed all over his body. Shall we follow beside, ghostly? Looking at its master's state, it seemed to be anxious, occasionally jumped to Ghostly, stretched out its hands to try to pull him, but Ghostly's body was too big compared to Xiaohui. Xiaohui could not exert its strength, couldn't help but became anxious. Zzz, called out a few times. Finally, Ghostly crawled to Tianbai's side, where his hands touched, was already cold. Ghostly clenched his teeth tightly, his body also trembled slightly. His eyes carefully assessed Tianbui like a man returning from a long journey, in the end only left with despair. From his face, water droplets dripped down, landed on Tianbai's already stiff face. The storm became heavier. His eyes slowly landed on Tianbai's chest. Although his clothes had been tidied, but that huge and terrible wound was still a ghastly sight. Ghostly as if he was stabbed, his body froze. Then he slowly turned and looked behind. Behind, Lu Sueki's lonely and mournful figure in the storm, she silently faced Ghostly's gaze, her face pale and bloodless, her hands at her sleeves, tightly clenched into fists, nails deeply embedded into her skin. That moment of gazing, what kind of heartache was it? The expression on Ghostly's face gradually became blank. Even the initial pain and sadness also gradually disappeared. Only blankness. He blankly turned his head, once again looked at Tianbui. The storm blew. Tianbai's face, unknowingly, was splashed with a few drops of mud on the ground. Ghostly slowly stretched out his hand, wiped away the rain on Tianbai's face. When he touched Tianbai's cold skin, his hand seemed to be scalded by fire, instinctively shrunk back, then again stretched out, carefully wiped away the mud and rain on Tianbai's face. Then, he propped up his body, crawled closer to his mentor's body. Using his own chest, shielded Tianbui from the storm, no longer letting the bitter rain touch his body. Ainin silently watched everything he did not stop. On her beautiful face, there was only desolation. When I was young, my family broke up and died. Ghost Li's voice suddenly came from the storm. He spoke very slowly, as if every word rolled in his heart countless of times before he slowly spat them out. Ainin quietly approached him, while Ghost Li's body did not move, still shielding Tianbui from the wind and rain. It was Master. He brought me back to Big Bamboo Valley, taught me, and raised me. His kindness, I will never be able to repay him in this lifetime. Ghost Li's body swayed a little, not knowing if it was because of the fatigue after the injury. He could not support the wind and rain. Ainin's expression changed, stretched out her hand to support him. But when her hand touched Ghost Li's body, Ghost Li slightly moved to the side, avoiding her. Ainin's hand froze in the air. Ghost Li strenuously carried Tianbai's body, deeply hugged his head in his arms. At the same time, his face revealed a deep pain, his mouth only softly muttering to himself. Lu Sueki stood beside him. Even in the storm, she could still hear his words clearly. Ghostly only repeated one sentence over and over again. In this lifetime, I will never be able to repay. In this lifetime, I will never be able to repay. Ainin's lips trembled slightly, her eyes swept past Tianbai's face. Who would know on the same night? This person also smiled and talked to her, made a promise to her, made her in the despair, saw the glimmer of hope. That slash, that wound. But the number of people injured was not only one. She smiled sadly, turned around, her body involuntarily swayed a few times, her delicate brows wrinkled, a mouthful of blood spurted out. Drops of blood fell on her chest clothes, also fell on the ground, just that the wind and rain were heartless. Not long after, the blood was corroded by the rain and disappeared. She looked up at the sky. The cold raindrops fell on her face. The firmament was like ink, pitch black. Wasn't it almost daybreak? But why in this world, until now, other than this lonely wind and rain, what was left was only pitch black. Ainin's tears in the wind and rain quietly rolled down. Chapter 438. The rain dispersed and the clouds gathered. The dark night finally passed. The first glimmer of light shone from the horizon. quietly spilling into the world. Qing Yun Hill, Big Bamboo Valley, was still tranquil, although the disciples were diligent, but they would not get up so easily. Outside Observe Silence Hall, between the roof tiles, there was still the remnant, dew left from last night, turned into water droplets, intermittently sliding down. The bamboo forest in the distance was still as verdant as usual. Looking at it from afar, at this time the bamboo forest was still pervaded with mist, like a thin veil, gently drifting. The main door of Observe Silence Hall was the same as usual, still wide open. Behind the door, on top of the green bricks, the yellow curtains rolled up beside the pillars. In front of the altar where the statues of the three Qing deities were enshrined, was quietly burning in the morning light. The slightly chilly morning breeze blew over from afar, swept past the houses and pavilions, gently made a turn at Observe Silence Hall, and then blew to an even further place. In the wind, a few clear and melodious bird cries were heard. This was the only sound in the morning. This was a very peaceful scene, Taoist paradise, not knowing how many mornings were spent like this, not tainted by the slightest worldly atmosphere. But in this kind of morning, it was different from the past, with an additional inharmonious abnormality. A completely drenched figure, kneeling at the entrance of Observe Silence Hall, his head buried deeply between his arms, close to the ground. The surrounding ground where he was kneeling was already drenched by the water droplets dripping from his body, and from his clothes there were still water droplets dripping down. And 6 chi in front of this person, on the Observe Silence Hall's green brick steps, Tian Bai's body quietly lay at the entrance. Although lifeless, but Tian Bai looked very serene. There was no sign of pain on his face, as if death to him was not a very important matter. Tian Bai's hands, folded and placed between his chest and abdomen, his clothes were also meticulously arranged, neatly put on. Other than that, his clothes also had drenching marks, but the moisture was much better than the person kneeling below the steps. Just that there were muddy stains everywhere on his clothes, although it was obvious that someone had done some washing and cleaning, but in a hurry. Obviously, it could not be washed clean, so these marks could still be seen everywhere. However, he probably wouldn't care about this. The morning breeze was still blowing, lightly brushing past Qing Yun Hill, Big Bamboo Valley, blowing past Observe Silence Hall's flying eaves and green tiles, blowing in front of Observe Silence Hall. As if feeling the chill in the wind, Ghost Lee's body trembled slightly. His body still looked weak, but he was still kneeling without moving, facing the door of Observe Silence Hall, buried his head deeply. There is everything he was familiar with here, the pavilions and palaces, the stone steps, the statues of deities, and even the soil on which he was kneeling and the faint aura emitted from the soil. These were all fragments of memories that he could not forget for even a moment. It was unknown how many times he had dreamt of returning to the past, of returning to this mountain and land. But now, he had returned, but his heart was like dead ashes. Behind Ghost Lee's kneeling figure, they walked past a long, open space. The place where they could see was Shaw Dannon's former playground, the kitchen. 10 years had passed. The kitchen door, made of 2 pieces of wood, seemed to have not changed at all, just that there were a few more scars, a few pieces of wood had fallen off, looking even more vicissitudes of life. The kitchen door was unlatched, but very quickly it was pushed open by a furry hand. Accompanied by a few slight easy sounds, the monkey Xiao Hui opened the door and lightly jumped in. Even the furnishings in the kitchen looked like they had not changed. The dining table and chairs, the stove for cooking, pots and bowls, were all at the original places. Xiao Hui's eyes turned, skillfully jumped onto the table in the middle of the house, and then looked to the right. As expected, on the right side of the kitchen table, leaning against the wall, a large pile of dry straw was piled together. On top of it was a yellow figure, sleeping soundly, its mouth and nose still making sound from time to time. It was Da Huang, who had played with Xiao Hui since young. Xiao Hui crouched on the table, its tail curled up, but it did not immediately jump forward to properly hug its good friend that it had not seen for a long time. It only scratched its head, turned and glanced outside the kitchen door, then looked at Da Huang, who was sleeping soundly, seemed a little hesitant. And at this moment, Da Huang, who had been sleeping soundly with its ears pulled down, eyes still closed, Both of its dog ears suddenly perked up, as if it heard something. Its head moved and opened its eyes. What came into view was a familiar figure lying on the table not far away. De Huang was startled, but immediately became alert. No longer sleepy, excitedly jumped up, barked twice at Xiao Hui. 3 steps leapt over, landing with its back feet, its 2 front feet resting on the edge of the table, its eyes filled with excitement, tail wagging nonstop. Xiao Hui grinned, seemed to be infected by De Huang's emotions, hugged De Huang's head in its arms, stroked De Huang's shiny fur. De Huang kept nudging Xiao Hui with its head, and then stuck out its tongue to lick Xiao Hui's face. Xiao Hui laughed, flipped over, and jumped down from the table. De Huang also turned around. After fooling around for a while, Xiao Hui seemed to have thought of something, frowned, stretched out its hand, and patted De Huang's head, then pointed towards the outside of the kitchen. De Huang looked at Xiao Hui, did not understand what Xiao Hui meant. Xiao Hui barked a few more times, jumped onto De Huang's back. De Huang's 4 legs spread out, ran out of the kitchen, looked around, and soon saw a figure kneeling at the observe silence hall. And that figure was obviously one that it was familiar with. Big Yellow could not help but be excited. It barked at the figure a few times, then it strode toward it while wagging its tail along the way. Very soon it ran past that empty space. Near Ghostly, just at this moment, De Huang's footsteps suddenly stopped. Its gaze went past Ghostly, who was kneeling at the observe silence hall door, saw Tian Bai's body lying peacefully on the stone steps outside the hall. Xiao Hui quietly slid down from Big Yellow's back, ran to Ghostly's side, touched its head, looked around, and then squatted on the ground, leaning close to Ghostly's body. De Huang slowly walked over, stepped up the stone steps, came to Tian Bai's side. It first watched Tian Bai's face for a long time, then gently sniffed Tian Bai's body, and then sniffed other parts of Tian Bai's body. While it was doing that, it kept swaying its tail gently at Tian Boli. Finally, Big Yellow turned its head and seemed to be confused. It walked to Tian Boli's head and gently rubbed its head against Tian Boli's face. It let out a low whine. Tian Bai did not have any reaction. De Huang was stunned for a long time, did not bark or howl as expected. It weakly rubbed Tian Bai's face for the last time, but there was still no reaction. As if giving up, this yellow dog quietly crouched down beside Tian Bai. Its eyes were still staring at Tian Bai. As if hoping that Tian Bai would suddenly wake up, it placed its head on its front legs, pulled down its ears, snuggled up beside its master's lifeless cold body. The morning breeze, carrying last night's chill, still quietly blew past. At the bottom of the stone steps, Ghostly's body trembled slightly again, but he very quickly fell into a still state again, kneeling motionlessly. This chilly morning, time was still quietly slipping by. A soft cry. Suru was startled awake from her dream, her body covered in cold sweat. Her hair was slightly messy, her face haggard. She slowly propped up her body from the table. Last night, she had fallen asleep on this table. The latch of the window, which had been closed, was opened a little, and a ray of morning light entered through the chink into the center of the room. Suru stared blankly at that ray of light for a long time, until her emotions slowly calmed down. She then smiled bitterly, turned around, and pulled over a small round mirror on the table. In the mirror, her beautiful face appeared, even though, because of longing and staying up late, she looked haggard, but the grace that emanated from her face was still captivating. Chapter 439. Her face was not old yet. What about her heart? She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time, sighed, and put the small round mirror on the table. Then, she got up and walked to the window. She stretched out her hand, and with a creak, the window was completely opened. The morning light immediately flooded into the house, chasing away all the darkness, lifting one's mood. A faint smile appeared on Suru's face. Facing the window, she slowly stretched her body. The feeling of the morning breeze on her face carried a faint chill. She opened the door and walked out. Seeing that it was still early, most likely those disciples had not woken up. Never mind, let them sleep a while more. Later she still had to instruct them to go down the mountain to search for Bui. Most likely they would be tired. Suru thought so. strolled towards the front hall of Observe Silence Hall. The winding corridor slowly extended under her feet. Outside the corridor, the slender bamboos swayed in the morning breeze, making rustling sounds. For some reason, Suru, in such a morning, discovered many things that she usually neglected. The paint on the railings of the corridor, over the years, mottled and peeling, many places had peeled off. She remembered the last time Observe Silence Hall was when she and Tian Bui were newlyweds. Unknowingly, this corridor had accompanied her for countless years, and she passed by here every day and did not notice. When Tian Bui returned, she must let him find time to repaint it again. In the thickest slender bamboo in the bamboo forest outside the railings, she could still vaguely see the two small swords carved on the bamboo. That was when she was newlyweds. She carved it on the green bamboo, hoping that the two swords could join together, cultivate immortality together. She remembered at that time, Tian Bui laughed at the ugly carvings. She pretended to be angry, immediately made him anxious. After coaxing for a long time, he then let him off. The scene was still vivid in her mind. Suru's lips revealed a trace of smile. Her mood improved. She took a deep breath of this slightly sweet morning air, continued walking. Then, she thought, De Huang was raised by Bui since young. He had been gone for so many days, she did not know if the disciples took good care of it. If it accidentally lost some weight, Bui would grumble and scold again when he returned. Suru smiled and shook her head, decided while it was still early, she would go to the kitchen to take a look at De Huang. She was thinking along the way. Unknowingly, she had reached the front hall of Observe Silence Hall. Clang! The first bell in the morning came from afar. That was the signal for Qing Yun's sect to wake up, and also the sound to wake up this new day. The sound of the bell was deep and heavy, echoing in the mountains for a long time. Suru's heart seemed to jump along with this voice. In front of the hall of Observe Silence, there were figures either kneeling or lying down, and De Huang, who had always loved to sleep, for some reason, woke up so early today and obediently lay on the stone steps of the hall of Observe Silence, looking listless. As if it heard something, Big Yellow's ears twitched. It turned its head and looked into the Observed Silence Hall. In the shadow that was not completely lit up by the morning sunlight, a lady was standing there, staring blankly at everything. Suru did not know why her heart was beating faster and faster, so much so that it felt like it was going to explode, causing her to feel suffocated. The figure that was quietly lying on the stone steps of Observe Silence Hall was so familiar that it seemed to be engraved in the deepest part of her soul, a shadow that could not be erased no matter what. But right now, she was praying 1,000 times in her heart. She was wrong. She saw wrongly. Her face was as white as paper, her feet like lead. Step by step, she slowly walked over, her lips also trembling slightly. De Huang, who was lying beside Tian Bui, looked at Suru, who was slowly walking over. Its tail gently wagged at her, but it buried its head on the ground again, its eyes silently watching its master who was lying in front of it. Finally nearing to a place where she could no longer escape. Tian Bai's familiar face imprinted into Suru's eyes. He seemed to be asleep, peacefully asleep. Suru only felt the world was spinning. Her feet staggered and almost fell to the ground. Luckily, her cultivation was high and managed to steady her body. Even so, her eyes were still blacked out. Her legs were weak. She walked to Tian Bai's side and sat down. Trembling hands slowly caressed Tian Bai's clothes. When it passed by Tian Bai's chest, Suru's hands paused for a moment, trembling even more violently. Then, 2 clear tears slowly flowed down from the corner of her eyes, drop by drop, landed on Tian Bai's face. She gently caressed her husband's face. The touch was icy cold. Waves of coldness came from her palm, like the coldness deep into her heart. She stared, her lips trembling, like she wanted to say something, but not a single word came out. Beside her, De Huang made a mournful cry, moved its head over, gently rubbed against her legs. She slowly raised her head, looked at the figure kneeling below the stone steps, and the gray monkey beside that figure. After a long while, she quietly, choked with sobs, said, "You are Xiao Fan?" Ghost Lee's body trembled, did not raise his head. On the contrary, his head instead buried even lower, even tightly stuck to the rough ground. The mud rubbed against his skin, but he seemed to be unaware. After a while, his trembling voice was heard. "Yes, disciple, sure mother." Suru smiled mournfully, said, "You don't have to be like this. Get up and speak." Ghostly knelt on the ground, did not raise his head, as if he had lost all his courage, did not dare to look at Suru, quietly said, "Disciple deserves to die 10,000 times. Did not manage to protect teacher." His voice was intermittent, like every word to him was a kind of punishment. Suru slowly lifted Tian Bai's upper body, hugged him in her arms. Her body trembled slightly, not knowing if it was because she felt the coldness of Tian Bai's body, or thinking to use her own warmth to warm up this cold body. "You get up." Her voice sounded hollow and desolate. In Ghost Lee's memory, he had never heard of Suru speaking in such a helpless tone, and this discovery made him feel even more fearful and in pain. Couldn't help but move his face slowly in the sand, so that the pain on his face could distract his heart that was about to explode. "If you don't get up, how are you going to tell me what happened?" Suru indifferently said, but her eyes were only looking at the body in her arms that had long lost consciousness, as if at this moment her eyes could not hold anything else. De Huang crawled forward 2 steps, used its head to gently nudge Tian Bai's body, whining softly. Ghost Lee's body paused for a while, slowly straightened up, raised his head, looked at Suru. That dignified and beautiful girl, even at this moment when her heart was dead, did not seem to have lost her grace. In the morning breeze, her slightly undulating hair fluttered beside her temples, accompanied by her fair face, stuck to Tian Bai's face. "You are back. You are finally home." This was what Ghostly heard Suru say, the last sentence. Then, all of a sudden, the blood in his chest surged and rolled like a raging wave. Following that, his vision turned black. It was as if a string that had been stretched taut in his mind had snapped in an instant. He, a plop sound, like a wooden plank falling to the ground, fainted. Just as he was about to lose consciousness, everything in front of him turned black, and he felt as if his entire body was being burned by fire. It was incomparably hot, but inside his body, it was as cold as ice. Suddenly, a few shouts came from afar. The shouts were filled with fear and pain, and after a while, they turned into cries. Chaotic footsteps were heard everywhere, but they were all heading towards the same direction. "Shenyang! Shenyang!" This silent cry was the last and only thought that flashed through Ghost Lee's mind, and then he lost consciousness. Chapter 440. This sleep, he did not know how long he slept for, just that in his deep sleep, he could feel the familiar smell around him. Not knowing how long it had been, he had not felt this sense of security. So he sank deep into dreamland, as if he did not want to wake up, just that deep in his dreams. There was a piercing pain, lingering and refusing to disperse, constantly piercing his heart. Letting out a long breath, Ghostly slowly woke up. The room in front of him, he felt like he was in a dream, quietly looked around. When he was still young, he lived here and then grew up. The tables, chairs, beds, doors, and windows were all engraved in his heart. Leaning against the wall of the bed, the huge Tao character was still hanging on the wall. However, the color of the words had faded a little, but the strokes still looked as vigorous and powerful as when he had first seen it. The wooden frame of the window made a light sound. A small gap opened. The gray monkey, Xiao Hui, jumped in from outside, saw Ghostly was already awake, half sitting on the bed, couldn't help but became happy, grinned nonstop, jumped onto the bed in a few leaps. Ghost Lee's heart jumped. This scene seemed to be the same as many years ago. If not for the change in his appearance, due to his injuries and the activation of the spiritual eye on Xiao Hui's head, he really felt that it was all a dream. Just that was after all impossible. Xiao Hui called out to Ghostly. Ghostly looked down and saw that Xiao Hui was holding a few wild fruits in its hands. Most likely it had picked them outside and wanted to share with its master. Ghostly shook his head, indicating that he did not want to eat. Xiao Hui also did not give in, turned, and with a whoosh jumped onto the table in the middle of the room, sat down, and then opened its mouth and started chewing. Ghostly quietly watched everything in the room. Finally, his gaze landed on the window that was open when Xiao Hui came in through the gap. A small patch of light shone in, unable to see clearly what was outside. But Ghostly did not need to look to know. Outside the window was a small courtyard. There was a pine tree, a green lawn, and also a stone-paved path. At the side of the courtyard, there was a semicircular arched door. Every grass and every tree here had long been engraved deep in his memory, could never be erased. The air was fresh with a hint of sweetness. Even the small courtyard outside the house seemed to have the fragrance of green grass. In a daze, he felt as if he had returned home. But a moment later, a sharp pain in his heart woke him up. Footsteps could be heard outside the door. Ghostly's gaze turned towards the door. The footsteps soon reached the door, but the person outside the unlatched door seemed to hesitate for a moment and did not immediately open the door. Ghostly stared at the door. A moment later, the door was finally pushed open. A tall and steady figure stood at the door. Almost at the same time, that person also saw Ghostly, who had woken up. Their gazes met in midair, but neither of them spoke immediately. There were too many complicated emotions in their gazes. Perhaps it was because of this that the thousands of words they wanted to say turned into silence. The monkey Xiao Hui sat on the table, opened its mouth and spat out the core of a wild fruit. Then it glanced at the door, called out twice, and continued to bury its head into its wild fruit. The man standing at the door sighed. The corners of his mouth seemed to reveal a bitter smile, shook his head, walked in, looked deeply at Ghostly, said, "We haven't met for so many years. Should I call you Old Seven? Or call you Little Junior Brother?" Ghostly's lips moved. In the end, he looked at the man in front of him and quietly called out, "Big Senior Brother." Everything in Big Bamboo Valley was still as quiet as he remembered. It was quiet outside the house, not knowing where the rest of the people had gone to. Xavion silently looked at the person in front of him. Not so long ago, he was his most beloved little junior brother. He was the most useless seventh disciple under Big Bamboo Valley's Tianbai teacher. And now, things had changed. Things remained the same, but the people had changed. 10 years, this was the first time they met. "These years, how have you been?" Xavion sat opposite Ghostly and asked. Ghostly did not answer. He only kept silent. 10 years, looking back, the time was like water. Unknowingly, he had already walked such a long road. Just that. How could he say the word well? Xavion looked at him, that young Zhang Xiao fan. Now he still looked the same as before. Just that on his face, there was still an additional taste of vicissitudes. And not knowing when, this person who was much younger than him, but now also much more skilled than him, his hair, his temples, had already started to turn white. Xavion let out a long sigh. He faintly said, "How is your body now?" Ghostly looked down at his wound. The rags on his chest had already been changed into neat and clean bandages. Obviously, it was the Big Bamboo Valley Senior Brothers who had rebandaged him. And the wound on his chest, although still aching, was much better than before he fainted. After a moment of silence, he said, "I am fine now. Thank you, Senior Brother, for your concern." Speaking until here, he seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Xavion and said, "I have already rebelled against Qing Yun. Do you all still acknowledge me as your junior brother?" Xavion smiled, although his smile carried some bitterness. He said, "Teacher's wife had told us before, when Teacher was still alive." Speaking of the two words, Xavion's eyes turned red. His voice obviously choked. Ghostly heard it, and his body also trembled. Xavion composed himself and continued. Teacher, when he was still alive, had told Teacher's wife many times that he had never personally chased you out of Big Bamboo Valley, and he had never thought that you had done anything wrong 10 years ago. So Teacher's wife instructed us, today, as long as you are still willing, you are still our Qing Yun Big Bamboo Valley number 7, little junior brother. Ghostly slowly lowered his head. His body trembled slightly. His left hand was placed on the mattress, tightly clenched into a ball. His right hand covered his face, quietly wiping away the tears. In the room, there was a moment of silence. After a long time, Ghostly's emotions slowly calmed down. Xavion's deep voice then sounded again. If your body is fine now, follow me to observe Silence Hall. Teacher's wife is there to keep vigil for teacher. She wants to see you. Yes. Walking out of the arched door, he saw the familiar circular corridor. Xavion walked in front without saying a word. His broad shoulders and back were like a small mountain. Ghostly quietly followed behind him. He couldn't help but think of his youth. When he first came to Big Bamboo Valley, he followed Xavion all the way. Slowly, he blended into the world of Big Bamboo Valley. Recalling the past, it was like a dream. His eyes quietly landed on Xavion's waist. He then discovered that, without knowing when, Xavion's waist already had a white linen. It was tied around his waist. Naturally, it was to mourn for his mentor Tion Bai's passing. His face was gloomy. He closed his eyes. Walking out of that corridor, he could see the observed Silence Hall from afar. Just that what was different from the usual tranquility was that today the observed Silence Hall was constantly emitting smoke and incense. At the same time, sobbing sounds could be heard indistinctly. Xavion silently walked towards observed Silence Hall. 2 steps later, he suddenly sensed something. He turned around and saw Ghostly standing there in a daze. He was looking at observed Silence Hall, but he did not follow. What is it? Ghostly's face was extremely pale. For some reason, he looked at the observed Silence Hall. He felt some fear. He was like a child who had done something wrong. He did not dare to face his grieving parent. Xavion seemed to notice something. He sighed and said, "Let's go." Speaking, he patted his shoulder. Ghost Lee's body moved. He glanced at Xavion. He silently nodded his head and walked up. The nearer he got to observe Silence Hall, the stronger the smoke and the sobbing sounds became clearer. But although there were familiar sounds in Ghost Lee's memory, but there were no female cries, no surus, and also not the senior sister Tion Linger, who was already married, whom he had originally expected. Finally, under Xavion's lead, he once again stood at the entrance of observed Silence Hall. A few gazes instantly turned and stopped on him. Ghostly's body was faintly trembling as he looked at them one by one. Wu Daoyi, Zheng Dali, Hidaji, Ladax, and Amanla. These familiar faces, right now one by one appear before Ghostly. Many years ago, they were once his closest kin in this world, his most trusted senior brothers. Their waists were the same as Xavion. White mourning cloth was tied around their waists. Their faces were sorrowful. Some of their eyes were already red and swollen from crying. Inside observed Silence Hall, there was a metal cauldron. A fire was burning inside. The senior brothers, standing beside, slowly placed the paper money in their hands into the fire. Smoke lingered in the air. Ghostly stared blankly. Behind the smoke, Tion Bui was quietly lying on a bed. The dirty clothes on his body had been changed into a set of clean ones. Neatly dressed, his countenance and spirit seemed to be much more serene. Suru was sitting beside Tion Bai's body. She stretched out her hand and held Tion Bai's hand. Her expression was very sad, but she did not shed a single tear. There was a small white flower in her hair. It was a wildflower that still had dew on it in the early morning. It was elegant and beautiful, with a hint of sadness. She only held her husband's hand tightly. She stared at Tion Bai's face, and her daughter, Tion Linger, did not appear in this observed Silence Hall. And that De Huang, who was raised by Tion Bui from young, right now, was silently crouching on the ground beside the bed. Its head was also listlessly crouching on the ground. It had completely lost its usual lively temperament. After Ghost Lee's gaze landed on Tion Bui, he could not move his eyes away. His footsteps were heavy. Slowly, step by step, he inched over. Xavion silently walked to the side. He took a white hemp rope and passed it to Ghostly. Ghostly looked at him. A trace of gratefulness flashed past his eyes. He nodded and took the hemp rope. He quietly said, "Many thanks." Xavion glanced at Suru. He said, "You go over to teacher's wife." After speaking, he quietly walked back to his fellow disciples, knelt down in front of Tion Bai's body, kowtowed 3 times. When he raised his head, his eyes were a little red again, turned around and took a stack of paper money from Wu Doi, who was kneeling beside him, started to slowly throw it into the fire. Ghostly looked at the hemp rope for a long time. He then tied it around his waist. The gray-white rope wound around his waist. It carried some sorrow, but also seemed to tie his heart to this place again. He quietly walked forward. He walked to the bed and knelt down. He kowtowed 3 times to Tianbai's body. Then, he turned to Suru and knelt down. Disciple. His voice suddenly paused. After a long time, he used a deep voice to speak again. Disciple Zhang, Xiaofan, pays respect to teacher's wife. Behind him, Xavion and the other 6 Big Bamboo Valley disciples looked over. Their expressions were complicated. But more than that, it was still the kind of joy and cordiality. Even Suru's face revealed a faint gratification. She looked at Ghostly and nodded. Then a trace of pain flashed past her face. She looked at Tian Bui. She quietly said, Bui, did you hear that? This is Lao Chi. He's back to kowtow to you. Ghostly knelt before Suru. He could not speak. Behind him, choking sounds were heard. Smoke lingered and slowly drifted. Observed Silence Hall seemed to be in a trance. Not sure if it was because the owner was no longer here. Even the hall looked empty. It did not become noisy because of the crowd. After a long while, Xavion wiped the tears from his eyes. He walked up to Suru. He quietly said, Teacher's wife, please tell me about teacher's funeral. Inform each branch's teachers and seniors. I still intend to make a trip to Longsho Valley to inform Ling Er, junior sister. Let her. This matter is not urgent. Suru suddenly interrupted Xavion. Xavion was shocked. The disciples behind him, including Ghostly, were also stunned for a moment. In the observed silence hall, it was quiet for a moment, not a sound at all. Chapter 441. After a long while, Xavion then plucked up his courage, carefully said, Teacher's wife, teacher has passed away. All disciples understand teacher's wife is sad, but this funeral cannot be delayed. Suru's expression did not change. Not only that, she did not even look at Xavion. In her eyes, other than looking at Lao Chi, who had just returned, there was only Tian Bai's figure. Xavion's face revealed embarrassment. For a moment, he did not know what to do. Looked back at those junior brothers who were kneeling on the ground, burning joss paper. But they were also looking at each other, not knowing what to do. And at this moment, Suru instead called out, Darren. Xavion hurriedly replied, Yes, teacher's wife. What instructions do you have? Suru said, You and the rest go out first. Without my call, do not come in. Xavion was stunned for a moment, stepped back a few steps. The junior brothers beside looked over. Xavion frowned and did not speak. The usually quick-witted Daji, who was standing beside him, shook his head at him. His face had an anxious expression. Xavion saw it. His brows only frowned even tighter. He had been with these junior brothers for a long time. What Daji was worried about, he naturally understood very clearly. Once he thought of that, Xavion's face turned pale with fright. His feet could not move no matter what. And at this moment, Suru glared at them, slightly angrily said, What are you all doing? Could it be that after your teacher died, you all disregard me, this teacher's wife's words? Plop, plop. A series of sounds, other than Ghostly, who was already kneeling in front of Suru, Xavion, and the rest of the Big Bamboo Valley disciples all knelt down, prostrated on the ground and kowtowed. Xavion's mouth said, Disciple does not dare. Disciple does not dare. Suru sighed. Her face revealed a deep weariness, as if she did not even have the strength to scold. Only gently waved her hand, said, All of you go out. Song Darren and the others didn't dare to go against the master's wife's words anymore. They retreated with a bitter face, but the stone in their hearts was heavy, and they didn't know what to do. Ghostly bowed lightly to Suru and also slowly stepped back. Unexpectedly, he had only stepped back a few steps when Suru suddenly said, Old Seven, stay here. I have something to ask you. Ghostly was surprised, stopped his steps, but Song Darren and the rest behind him heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, as long as there were people beside Shenyang, most likely there would not be any accidents. Footsteps were heard. Not long after, Song Darren and the rest of them had already left the observed silence hall. In the observed silence hall, it was quiet for a moment, only the burning flames swallowing the paper money, occasionally emitting light, crackling sounds. Ghostly quietly stood at his spot, lowered his head and did not speak. After an unknown period of time, Suru was heard sighing, said, "Your teacher, this person, has always been hard-mouthed but soft-hearted. That unforeseen event 10 years ago. He has always been brooding over it, although he did not say it to me, but I can see, in his heart, he actually felt very sorry to you." Ghost Lee's eyes turned red, shook his head hard, anxiously said, "No, it is disciple who is unfilial, let down teacher's benevolence. It is disciple who let teacher down." Speaking till the end, he was already choking with sobs. Suru's lips trembled slightly. Hearing Ghost Lee's sobbing words, it seemed like the pain in her heart was evoked, just that although her eyes were in pain, but she still held it in, did not cry. She silently looked at Tian Bai's face, faintly said, "In your teacher's heart, he has never treated you as a disciple who was chased out of the door. Do you understand?" Ghostly lowered his head and quietly said, "Yes." Suru said, "Since you have acknowledged him as your teacher, you go over and burn some paper money for him. Take it as you have shown some filial piety. I believe Bai will also be happy." Ghostly clenched his teeth, knelt down before Tian Bai's body, kowtowed 3 times, tears in his eyes, then got up and walked to the cauldron, knelt down. The fire in the cauldron was already much lower, probably because Xavion and the rest had left and no one added more paper money. Ghostly glanced to the side, saw a few thick stacks of paper money not far away. They were all unopened new items. Big Bamboo Valley was full of cultivators. Most likely they did not use paper money even once in a few hundred years. These things must be bought by Xavion at the foot of the mountain to prepare for his funeral. Thinking of that, Ghost Lee's heart turned sour again. Quietly took a stack, unsealed the seal, slowly using 3 sheets. One by one slowly placed them into the fire. The fire slowly brightened up again. The flame flickered with scarlet-yellow light, dancing on the paper money with thin gold and silver foil, turning the paper money into ashes one by one. Suru sat beside Tian Bui, quietly watching the undulating, rolling flames. The fire reflected on Ghost Lee's face, refracting light that flickered between bright and dark. She suddenly asked, "When your teacher passed away, were you by his side?" Ghost Lee's body shook slightly and then turned around, still kneeling beside the cauldron, at the same time facing Su. Quietly said, "Yes." Suru looked deeply at Ghost Lee, said, "Yesterday, after you fainted, I helped you to treat your wounds and discovered that where your chest was seriously injured, there was a streak of your teacher's unique scarlet flame, sword energy in your body. The most serious injury to your meridians was also because of this." "What's going on?" Ghost Lee's heart jumped. Unknowingly, his hands started to sweat. After a moment, he quietly said, "Disciple's injury this time was indeed teacher's heavy blow, but, speaking till here, he was at a loss, did not know where to start. That night's unforeseen events happened suddenly, twists and turns. Even though he had been through the turmoil of the world for a long time, he still couldn't help but be shaken to the core. Not to mention that his most respected teacher lost his life. It was even more difficult to describe." Suru snorted, her phoenix eyes filled with power, coldly said, "Tell me the truth." Ghostly for a moment did not dare to look at Suru, lowered his head. After a moment, he then slowly narrated, from when he returned to Grass Temple Village ruins, encountering the mysterious person, chasing him all the way to the abandoned morgue outside Hyang City, until Tian Bai's death, slowly narrated to Suru. Suru's face turned paler as she listened, especially when she heard the last part about Tian Bai's death. There was not a bit of blood on her face, only her hands tightly grasped Tian Bai's hand, as if afraid her husband would leave her again. At the end, Ghostly quietly said, "This is what happened. Disciple will never dare to deceive Shenyang." Suru's eyes shifted to Tian Bai, looked deeply at that familiar and serene face. Maybe, in her husband's heart, he did not have much remorse. In his heart, he felt that these were what he should do. She breathed deeply, straightened her body, although in her heart, she really wanted to lie down like this, lie with her husband, not care about anything anymore, just that she knew it was not the time yet. You really saw it clearly. Suru's voice sounded a little erratic. Ghostly for a moment did not understand, said, Shenyang, what do you mean? Suru's face was pale, quietly said, that mysterious person is really sect head Reverend Daoxian's senior brother? Ghostly inhaled deeply, resolutely said, Disciple saw it with my own eyes. Even if that person turned into ashes, Disciple will not be wrong. Suru silently nodded. After a moment, she slowly asked again, For what you said just now, by at the end when his mind was in a mess, he struck you down. Was it Small Bamboo Valley Anan who killed him? Ghostly's body shook greatly, cold sweat dripping down his forehead, but in the end, he still clenched his teeth, said, Yes. Suru did not speak, only stared blankly at Ghostly, as if in a trance. But under her gaze, Ghostly's expression changed drastically, as if he was suffering. After a long while, he then quietly said, That Lu Sweki she actually did it to save me, no, disciple. Suddenly, his expression turned solemn, knelt on the ground, quietly said, Shenyang, all the wrongs are disciples' fault. That Lu Sweki Suru sighed, cut him off. I remember among the Qing Yun sect disciples, these few years, aren't you the best with her? Even after you entered the evil way, I heard she still misses you. For you she even went against Shiyue's senior sister's wishes several times. Even rejected Funxiang Valley Yun Elon Valley Master's marriage proposal. Isn't that so? Ghostly knelt on the ground, his heart in a mess. He had thousands and thousands of words to say, but not a single one came out. That night of the great change. Although he knew that Anan most likely had to make a move to save him. But Tian Bui was after all his teacher who had raised him up, and was also the person whom he respected and loved in his life. And right before his eyes, that Tanya celestial sword had pierced through his teacher's chest. After that, he almost subconsciously, in his deep heartache, pushed Anan far away. After the southern border turmoil, there was a brief embrace, but under this fate, the gulf became deeper and wider. Really did not know why heaven was so cruel. Just at this time in front of Suru, although Ghostly had such complicated feelings, but he could not sit back and watch as Suru misunderstood Anan. But he also deeply understood his Shenyang's deep feelings towards his teacher, even more than himself, so something that even he could not accept. How could he ask his Shenyang to be magnanimous? Ghostly was stunned, speechless, did not know what to say. The truth was as sharp and merciless as a blade. Everyone who came near seemed to be hurt by it. Just that right now Suru's expression was not as resolute as what Ghostly had imagined, or pained and sorrowful. On the contrary, after the initial sorrow, her face slowly turned thoughtful. After a moment, Suru said to Ghostly, I remember you said just now, before Bui passed away, he had a brief moment of consciousness and recognized you. Is that right? Ghostly nodded, said yes. Suru said, Then what did he say to you? Ghostly concentrated and thought for a moment, quietly said, After teacher woke up, he said 2 words to me. Suru asked, What did he say? Ghostly said, Teacher's first sentence was strange. He only repeated 3 words. Don't blame her, don't blame her. The second sentence was to instruct disciple, after teacher passed away, to bring his body back to Big Bamboo Valley to hand to Shenyang, and also to tell Shenyang. Suru's countenance changed, said, What did he want you to tell me? Ghostly quietly said, Before teacher passed away, disciple told disciple to tell Shenyang. Ask Shenyang to restrain your grief. Don't do silly things. Suru was stunned, speechless, glistening tears in her eyes. Her body swayed and swayed, looking powerless, tottering, already heartbroken. Ghostly was worried but did not dare to step forward. He could only kneel on the ground, kowtowed, and said, Shenyang, restrain your grief. After a long while, Suru's slightly calm voice was heard, quietly said, I am fine. You can get up. Ghostly then stood up, looked up. Suru's expression had already calmed down, but the sorrow in her eyes was still evident. In observed silence hall, it was silent again. Ghostly quietly added a few pieces of paper money into the pot. At this moment, Suru suddenly spoke. In your heart, do you also have resentment towards Lu Sweki for killing your teacher? Ghostly was shocked, did not know what Shenyang meant by this question. For a moment, he could not answer. But Suru was an intelligent person. In addition to her worldly experience, she had long seen through it. Just by looking at Ghostly's expression, she already understood most of it. She indifferently said, "Do you know before Bai died, he still said to you, 'Don't blame her'? These 3 words, what did he mean?" Ghostly was surprised, said, "What?" Suru smiled bitterly, said, "If I am not wrong, I'm afraid Bai was willing to let that Anan Miss Lu kill him." Ghostly was shocked, said, "Shenyang, what you said." Suru heaved a long sigh, said, "Forget it. The past is unbearable to recall, but in the end it cannot be forgotten. The secret of our previous generation cannot implicate you juniors." She quietly turned back, looked at Tian Bai. Tian Bai's face was serene and peaceful. Looked like he was asleep. She quietly said, "Bai, you must also want me to tell him that secret, right?" Chapter 442. Qingyan Hill, Small Bamboo Valley. The mountain breeze blew past the verdant bamboo forest, bringing waves of bamboo, rustling, reverberating in the empty forest. One man looked up at the sky. The horizon was cloudless, a stretch of azure blue, looking like it was transparent. She took a deep breath. Her mood improved, but her footsteps did not slow down. Passing through the bamboo forest path, very soon she saw the small bamboo hut where her teacher, Shiwa Master, was meditating. She walked to the door, lightly knocked on the door, said, "Teacher, I am back." Shiwa Master's voice was heard, said, "Is it Min or come in?" When Min pushed the door open and walked in, the hut was not big. After entering, she saw Shiwa Master sitting cross-legged on the couch, eyes closed resting. She walked to the side, said, "Teacher." Shiwa Master slowly opened her eyes, glanced at her, saw that she was alone, said, "What is it? Did not find her." Wunmin nodded, said, "Yes, I went to Lu Jr.'s sister's residence twice today, but she was not there. I asked the other sisters, but no one saw her. Could it be that she had something to attend to and went down the mountain?" Shiwa Master was expressionless, said, "Sweki has always known the severity. If she went down the mountain, she would definitely inform me. You all could not find her, most likely." Her voice paused, seemed to think of something, changed the topic, spoke to one Min. "Since you all can't find her, then forget it. Anyway, there is nothing urgent. You can go and study by yourself." One Min nodded, acknowledged, and then bowed to Shiwa Master, and then walked out. Before leaving, she even gently closed the bamboo hut door. After Wen Min's footsteps gradually disappeared, Shiwa Master's usually unperturbed face then slowly revealed a thoughtful expression. After a long time, she quietly sighed. Light shone in from the window of the bamboo house, illuminating this exquisite and simple bamboo house. Shiwa Master quietly got down from the bamboo bed, walked to the door, opened the door, and walked out, leaving a stretch of silence in this small space. Full Moon Platform was an extremely secluded place in Small Bamboo Valley. Every night when the bright moon was in the sky, the scenery here was extremely moving. Legend said that on a full moon night, the moonlight, like water, after being refracted by the white stones of Full Moon Platform, it was enough to illuminate the entire Small Bamboo Valley mountain range. It was already a wonder of the world. Also one of the famous scenery on Qingyan Hill. For the past 10 years, Lu Sweki often in the dead of night danced with the moon here. Shiwa Master was her teacher who had raised Lu Sweki since young, like a teacher and also like a mother. No one understood Lu Sweki's thoughts better than her. When she heard that one Min could not find Lu Sweki, after thinking for a while, she guessed that Lu Sweki most likely came to this secluded place. Along the way, the bamboo forest became more luxuriant, and at the same time, they were further and further away from those bustling halls and pavilions. Although Shiwa Master's own residence was also at a secluded place, but walking along this small path, listening to the bamboo rustling incessantly, she could not help but felt her heart empty. Not sure if it was because of this feeling that Sweki especially liked this place. Shiwa Master quietly thought so in her heart, walked towards Full Moon Platform. As expected, she had just stepped on a full moon platform, saw that familiar white figure quietly standing on the huge rock beside the cliff. In the endless abyss, the mountain wind whistled incessantly. Lu Sweki's white clothes also fluttered in the wind. Tianya was still in her hand, quietly emitting faint blue rays of auspicious air. Shuewa Master looked at her back figure, was silent for a long time. Her eyes seemed to have some kind of complicated emotions. Her eyes also flashed incessantly. After a long time, she then gently coughed. Lu Sweki immediately sensed the abnormality behind her, felt slightly surprised. Right now it was daytime. Usually there would not be any small Bamboo Valley sisters coming to this secluded place. Why would someone come here today? And that person was so close behind her, and she did not even realize it. She swiftly turned around. Reflected in her eyes was her teacher, Shuwen Master's figure. Lu Sweki was startled, quickly floated down from the huge rock, came before Shuwen Master, bowed her head and said, "Teacher, why are you here?" Shuwen Master's eyes showed some tenderness, used her hand to pull Lu Sweki's clothes, gently said, "The strong wind blowing from here is rather cold and harsh. Although your skills are high, but it is not advisable to blow too much. It will not be beneficial." Lu Sweki bowed her head and said, "Disciple understands. Thank you, teacher, for your concern." Shuiwa Master glanced at her, sighed, and said, "Do you resent teacher in your heart?" Lu Sweki was shocked, said, "Teacher, why do you say so?" Shuiwa Master indifferently said, "I told you that secret and let you go down the mountain. Who knows heavens is making fools of people. After several twists and turns, you had no choice but to kill Big Bamboo Valley Tian teacher uncle who was restrained by Zhu Xian ancient sword, and it was done in front of that person." Lu Sweki's expression dimmed, slowly shook her head and said, "Teacher, don't say any more. Disciple has already thought it through clearly. This is the will of the heavens. Master, even you did not expect it. Moreover, at the last moment of that day, although Tian Shu could not speak, I clearly felt his intentions. That sword, Tian Shu also wanted me to act." Her voice paused. Her expression suddenly revealed a desolate look, as if mocking herself, as if laughing bitterly, faintly said, "As for between me and that person, disciple did not hold any hope. The family rules. Morality is like a mountain. I myself understand it very well." Big Bamboo Valley Tian teacher uncle was his teacher who brought him up from young. He had always regarded him as his father. Now he died in my hands. If I was him, I would also find it hard to accept. Speaking until here, she silently looked up, looked at Shuwa Master, smiled forlornly, and said, "Teacher, don't worry, disciple. I have really let it go." Shuwa Master felt a pain in her heart. With her experience, how could she not know what Lu Sweki was thinking? Just that this matter was really too unexpected, and there was no room for negotiation. In the past, although she was resolutely against this stubborn disciple's feelings, but right now, she still could not bear to do it. Just that no matter how much she could not bear to, in the end it was still useless. Shuiwa Master gently sighed, shook her head, softly said, "Sweki, don't be too sad. Don't hurt your body." Lu Sweki forced a smile, quietly said, "Teacher, you came to this remote place to look for me. Is there any urgent matter?" Shuiwa Master nodded her head, said, "That's right. There's indeed one matter here. Although it is not big, but it seems very strange. And after thinking about it, only you are more suitable." Lu Sweki said, "What is it?" Shuiwa Master glanced at her, said, "Actually, it is still that secret. Oh, right. That day you said after the incident, you personally sent Ghost Li and Tian Bai's bodies to Big Bamboo Valley?" Lu Sweki heard the words ghostly. Her expression changed slightly, but then nodded, said with certainty, "Yes, that day that person was seriously injured, although his life was not in danger, but to bring Tian teacher uncle's body back alone, it was really too strenuous, and this matter should not be dragged on." Disciple then sent them on their way. "But I will only send them to Big Bamboo Peak. Once they land, I will leave." Shuiwa Master nodded her head, said, "That's right. The strangeness is here." Lu Sweki was slightly surprised, said, "What is it, teacher?" Shuiwa Master indifferently said, "Like what you said, as early as 2 days ago, Tian Bai's body had already returned to Big Bamboo Valley. But until today, there is not a trace of condolence news from Big Bamboo Valley." Lu Sweki was shocked, couldn't help but frowned. Shui Master clasped her hands behind and walked to one side, gazed far out, saw the clouds far away, Big Bamboo Valley looming in that direction. She watched for a long while, said, Tian Bui is the head of Big Bamboo Valley. His position is not small. Once the news is out, even Sekhead Reverend has to go over to pay respects, but Big Bamboo Valley kept it a secret. Isn't it a very strange matter? She paused for a moment, turned and looked at Lu Sweki, said, Other than that, this morning I also secretly sent someone to find an excuse to go to Longsho Valley. Discovered that Tian Linger was still at Longsho Valley. With the news of her father's passing, she actually knew nothing about it. Lu Sweki was silent for a long time, said, Disciple understands. Shui Master nodded, said, You are exceptionally intelligent. I will not say anything more. Actually, I am not suspecting anything. Suru is my junior sister. Both of us are like sisters. Not for others. I'm actually more worried that she is deeply in love with her husband and wife. Unable to think things through, she did something foolish. But as long as Big Bamboo Valley does not send out a funeral as Small Bamboo Valley head, it is not convenient for me to visit. In addition, there are many hidden twists and turns in this matter. It is really inconvenient for others. I can only let you go over again. Lu Sweki nodded, said, Disciple understands. Since it is so, if there is nothing else, Disciple will go over now. Shui Master nodded slightly, said, All right, be careful. If there are any changes, quickly come back and inform me. Lu Sweki acknowledged, bowed to Shui Master, turned around. Tianya, celestial sword glowed. She moved with the sword. A sharp whistling sound was heard. She had already turned into a blue light, charged up to the sky. Shui Master looked at Lu Sweki's slightly hurried figure, completely unlike her usual calm demeanor, knew that this stubborn and infatuated disciple, although looked strong on the surface, and let it go, but in her heart, she could not let it go. She was silent for a long time, finally only quietly sighed, shook her head, turned and walked down the platform, heading straight away. Thousands of miles away, in majestic Fox Mountain. Chapter 443. In the cold stone room, the frost-cold air was still rising. That serene green-attired girl, also as usual quietly lying on the cold stone platform. Yuji, whose face was veiled, stood alone in the cold stone room, stared at Bai Yao for a long time, gently sighed, carrying a lot of helplessness. In Yuji's heart, recently there was indeed too much helplessness. Made her puzzled, made her heart ache, and also made her gradually confused. First, Ghost King seemed to have completely changed into another person, the resolute and decisive Ghost King. Although he still had great talent and bold vision, but the killing intent in his daily actions was getting heavier and heavier. In just a few days, because of a few small matters that disobeyed his orders, Ghost King had already killed a number of people. Among them even included a high-ranking Ghost King Sect Senior. And these small matters, if it was 2 years ago, Ghost King most likely would have laughed it off. Yuji clearly felt everyone in Ghost King's sect was in a state of panic. Everyone was fearful. No one knew which day they would suddenly, because of some insignificant small matter, inexplicably lose their lives. What made Yuji even more heartache was that day when she accidentally saw Ghost King and Ghostly fighting. Although it was just a few moves, but Yuji was not an ordinary disciple. She was one of the 4 great holy envoys. Zhuke, she could clearly see, since when between the two men, there was already an extremely deep crack. She could even see, in Ghost King's moves, it might not be without killing intent. Her eyes dimmed, looked at Bai Yao. Bai Yao was still quietly sleeping. It was because of this respectable and beautiful girl. The two men came together, but for what? After 10 years, would they reach such a stage? Yuji really did not dare to imagine if one day the two men killed each other. What would be the result? And now it seemed this kind of thing might happen. Men humph men. Yuji hatefully muttered in her heart, her mind in a mess. When her eyes turned to Bai Yao, it turned into pity. This child that she had always seen as her own daughter, every time she saw Bai Yao, she couldn't help but feel sad. While she was silently pondering alone, the thick stone door of the cold stone room suddenly made a low rumbling sound. Someone opened it from the outside. Yuji turned and looked. Not long after, Ghost King's figure appeared at the door and slowly walked in. She couldn't help but was stunned. Ghost King also saw Yuji, nodded to her, lightly said, "You are here too." Yuji suddenly sneered, stared at Ghost King, but did not speak. Ghost King frowned. A trace of anger flashed past his eyes. The current him seemed to be especially easily angered, which was very different from his usual temperament. Just that Yuji was, after all, not an ordinary person. Her relationship with his father and daughter was even more extraordinary. Ghost King had always regarded Yuji with special respect. He could only ask, "What is it?" Yuji snorted and sneered. "Do you still remember that there is a daughter lying here?" The Ghost King frowned. "What are you saying? How can I not remember? I only have this one child." Yuji solemnly said, "All right, then tell me, how long has it been since you came here to see Bai Yao?" Ghost King was stunned. For a moment he could not speak. After a moment, a trace of guilt flashed past his eyes. He sighed and said, "It's my fault. Recently there are many matters to attend to. I'm not in a good mood too, so I came less often." Yuji coldly said, "I really don't understand. Not only you, also that ghostly. What exactly is going on? Both of you seem to have changed a lot." Speaking till the last sentence, her tone had already slowly turned deep. Ghost King did not seem to mind Yuji's tone. Instead, when he heard ghostly two words, his face suddenly darkened, snorted and said, "Lad does not see the big picture. Don't mention him in front of me." Yuji looked at Ghost King's face, saw indistinct anger. She was about to say something, but suddenly a wave of tiredness engulfed her. For a moment she felt disheartened, shook her head and said, forget it. Do as you wish. Anyway, both of you are on your own. I really can't control it, and also can't be bothered." Speaking, she turned and walked towards the door. Ghost King looked at her back, frowned, looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end he did not. Yuji's hand was about to reach the heavy stone door. Suddenly, her hand stopped in the air. Almost at the same time, Ghost King, who was standing behind her, also felt something. A sharp glint flashed in his eyes. An invisible but copious, powerful force, like a huge, surging tide, swept past the ground beneath their feet. Ghost King and Yuji were both highly skilled people. For a moment their countenance changed because of this strange force. Just that. Yuji was shocked. Ghost King instead was surprised with a hint of joy, his eyes glinting incessantly. This strange tide came wave after wave, like the surging sea, never stopping, slowly. Yuji clearly felt the ground beneath her feet was trembling slightly, and this trembling was slowly intensifying. Her face turned slightly pale. This sudden strange force, its force was unimaginable, shocking. It was not something a human could withstand. She looked back in shock. Ghost King's expression was strange, his eyes bright, but not knowing what he was thinking, but on his face there was not much fear. And at this moment, suddenly in this room, which looked like it was wrapped by innumerable thick rocks, indestructible cold stone chamber, a series of crisp sounds burst out, as if something had exploded. This time, Ghost King and Yuji's countenances changed greatly. Shocked, the two of them hurriedly looked over, only to see that on the originally extremely sturdy stone wall, there were actually a few short cracks, and from the cracks, there were a few small stones continuously falling down. At the same time, the ground under their feet seemed to be trembling more and more violently. Fortunately, this strange force seemed to have found an outlet when it was tearing the mountain wall. Not long after the mountain wall split open, the two acutely felt that the strange, mysterious force in the depths of the ground beneath their feet was rapidly weakening. Not long after, it disappeared without a trace. Yuji stood silently for a long time, her brows tightly frowning. If not for the shocking cracks on the stone walls, she almost thought it was her illusion. However, the cracks were like knives, and they were clearly carved on the extremely hard stone wall. Yuji turned and looked at Ghost King. For some reason, Ghost King only glanced at her and then turned back, looked at Bai Yao. "Do you know what is going on?" Yuji suddenly felt a shadow in her heart, a bad premonition. Ghost King slowly shook his head, indifferently said, "I also don't know. Later I will send someone to survey the terrain, see if it is an earthquake." Yuji pondered for a moment, said this should not be an earthquake, that turbulent force just now like a huge wave, and in it there was clearly a sharp, murderous energy. It is definitely not a natural disaster. Ghost King was silent. After a moment said, I will investigate this in detail. You don't have to worry about it. Yuji stared at his back for a long time. The veil on her face moved without any wind. After a while, she did not speak again, turned straight away, opened the heavy stone door, and walked out. The stone door in the heavy rumble slowly closed again. The cold stone chamber again fell into silence. Looking at that serene and slightly smiling beautiful face, Ghost King's deep and sharp eyes finally slowly softened. He quietly sat down at the side of the stone bed, his eyes only looking at Bai Yao with unspeakable longing and pain. And it seemed only at this time, when he was alone with his daughter, would he show some weakness. Just that, who would know? Or should it be, even if it was Ghost King himself, would he understand? Nobody knew. And outside this cold stone chamber, Yuji had just walked a few steps, stopped again, frowned, and looked around. She did not know if it was because she was in an extremely thick and sturdy cold stone chamber, although she felt that strange, mysterious power, but the damage to the surroundings was not that great. Of course, to be able to tear a few cracks on the extremely sturdy stone walls, this power was already no small matter. However, outside the cold stone chamber, what she saw was much more serious. Inside the tunnels that Ghost King's sect dug out, everywhere was a mess. Falling rocks and debris could be seen everywhere from afar. Anxious shouts, painful groans were heard. Clearly, that mysterious power had caused a more serious impact on majestic Fox Mountain than expected. And in this chaos, Yuji also discovered another unusual thing. In these well-ventilated tunnels, unknowingly, since when the air was filled with a faint stench of blood. She did not know where the stench came from, but it seemed to be everywhere. No matter where she went, she could feel this stench. Although this stench was not strong, but Yuji still felt very uncomfortable, just that the vexing matters to her right now were too many and did not have the mood to worry about this. To her, right now, she felt like a gust of air was stuck in her chest. No matter what, she only wanted to rush out of this mountain to take a breath of fresh air outside. That was what she thought, and that was what she did. Yuji's figure very quickly disappeared in this mountain tunnel, just that the faint stench of blood seemed to still quietly pervade. Chapter 444. Qingyun Hill, Small Bamboo Valley. This was already the third day after Tianbai's body was sent back to Big Bamboo Valley by Ghostly, but Suru still strangely prevented the Big Bamboo Valley disciple from passing on the grievous news. This not only made Xavion and the rest felt bewildered. Even Ghostly was also puzzled. Just that, no one dared to speak of this matter to Suru. Facing her husband, who was using celestial treasures to protect his body, Suru's sorrowful face already made everyone speechless. And Big Bamboo Valley had a small number of people and had always been low-key in Qingyun's sect. If there was no urgent matter, no one would come to this secluded peak. That was why even after Big Bamboo Valley held a memorial service in Observe Silence Hall for 3 days, no one in Qingyun's sect noticed. Just that this morning, finally there was an outsider quietly landed on Big Bamboo Valley, dressed in white like snow. Floating in the air, it was Anan. Faint blue light flashed. Propitious air gently lingered. Tianya in her fair hand quietly radiated brilliance. Anan silently looked around, saw the green hills and clear water. Tranquil as usual, there did not seem to be anything unusual. Only at the two sides of the Observe Silence Hall, hanging 2 white mourning curtains, could see the sorrow here. She quietly looked at the white mourning curtains for a while, then shifted her gaze, walked towards the hall. Not long after, Xavion and the rest who noticed the commotion, dressed in mourning clothes, one after another walked out from the hall, their faces carrying a trace of surprise, at the same time also some awkwardness. When they saw clearly that the person was Lu Sweki and she was alone, Song Darren and the rest were visibly relieved. Lu Sweki cupped her hands in greeting, lightly said, Small Bamboo Valley Lu Sweki, greet Song's senior brother and senior brothers. Xavion and Wudi, Hidaji and the rest who were standing behind him did not dare to slight. All returned the greeting. Then Xavion, with a bitter laugh, said, "Why did Lou Jr.'s sister come to our place this? AI, let you see a joke." Lou Swecky's face did not have the slightest smile. Instead looked solemn and sorrowful. After a moment of silence, said, "Swecky did not come with any other intention. Just want to pay respects to Tion teacher uncle and pay my respects to Suru teacher uncle. Hope all senior brothers to inform. Swecky will be very grateful." Song Darren and the others looked at each other. Pondering for a moment, Song Darren said, "Junior sister Lou is too polite. You're not an outsider." He suddenly paused. Lou Swecky's face also strangely reddened. Xavion was a little embarrassed, smiled, and said, "It's like this. Shenyang is not here right now. Early this morning, she went alone to the bamboo forest at the back of the mountain, and—" He sighed. His face revealed grief. Quietly said, "Shenyang was too sad about teacher's passing. This time she brought teacher's body. Told us that she will bury teacher alone." Lou Swecky frowned. A trace of uneasiness flashed past her heart. This situation was even stranger than what she had expected. Not wanting to alert others was fine, but how could she not let her own daughter Tian Linger know Suru wanted to bury Tian Bai alone? Her thoughts turned, pondered for a moment, finally still asked Song Darren, "Then where's that person?" Song Darren was surprised at first, but looking at Lou Swecky's expression, plus Hidaji, who was always smart, pulled his sleeve, winked at him, immediately understood, hesitated for a moment, said, "Little junior brother also went to the back of the mountain." Lou Swecky was slightly surprised, looked up at Song Darren. Song Darren, with a wry smile, said, "Shenyang did not allow us to follow, only called little junior brother." Lou Swecky did not speak. After a moment, she bowed to Song Darren and the others, said, "Thank you all senior brothers. Since it is so, I will not delay you all. In the future I will pay respects to Tian teacher uncle." Song Darren and the others returned the bow. Song Darren hesitated for a moment, said, "Lou Jr.'s sister, there are many twists and turns in this matter. I hope you—" Not waiting for Song Darren to finish, Lou Swecky already said, "I am awake. Song senior brother, please don't worry. Swecky will not say a word to outsiders." Song Darren nodded, did not speak anymore. Lou Swecky also did not speak anymore, turned and left. Watching that white figure leaving, Wu Dai stepped forward, said, "Big senior brother, I think most likely she's going to the back of the mountain. Is this all right?" Hidaji beside indifferently said, "How is it most likely? This Lou Jr.'s sister is definitely going to the back of the mountain to take a look. Today she came to Big Bamboo Valley. Must be carrying Small Bamboo Valley, Shuiwa teacher uncle's order. If she does not clarify Shenyang's situation, when she returns, it will be hard for her to explain to Shuiwa teacher uncle." Song Darren was silent for a moment, said, "It's also good that she's going. I always feel that these few days Shenyang has been grieving too much, always worried that something might happen, just that Shenyang does not allow us to follow. We also cannot defy her wishes." Although Lao Chi followed, but we also know that if Shenyang really asked Lao Chi to leave, with Lao Chi's character, plus he has always respected Shenyang, I'm afraid he will not dare to defy. With this Small Bamboo Valley, Miss Lu going to take a look, there won't be any harm. Everyone heard, mostly nodded their heads in agreement, and then became silent. Song Darren sighed, turned and walked back to observe Silence Hall. Big Bamboo Valley back of the mountain bamboo forest. Looking over, the scenery here and Small Bamboo Valley were quite similar. As far as the eyes could see, lush green bamboo forest, dancing with the wind, the bamboo waves bursts. The morning light shone down from the sky. In between the gaps of the bamboo forest, spots of light traces landed on the ground. On the thin bamboo leaves, numerous crystal-clear dewdrops condensed, glossy and round, like the most precious pearls. Ghostly was among them. For a moment he felt lost. Many years ago, it was here that he started his life in Big Bamboo Valley. Not knowing how many mornings and dusks, he wielded the hatchet, splattered his sweat, quietly chopping in this secluded bamboo forest that once dry and dull years. Now thinking about it, it seemed like a dream, just that the peace that he once had could never be found again. The bamboo waves, the mountain breeze gently brushed past his ears. He sighed in the depths of his heart, tossed aside this faint and senseless sadness, turned and looked at Suru. Tian Bai's body was lying on the ground, not far away. Beside it was still De Huang. Ever since Tian Bai's body was brought back to the mountain, this dog seemed to have been accompanying Tian Bui, never left. Under Tian Bai's body, there was not the slightest cushion. This seemed to be disrespectful to the dead, but from Ghostly to Xavion, and even Du Baishu, no one dared to question Suru's actions. Just that even though they would not doubt Suru's grief, but her actions were still very puzzling. Ghostly had the intention to ask, but right now Suru's back facing him, like a wall, he did not know how to speak. And at this moment, Suru instead broke the silence. "Why? You have something to say to me?" Ghostly was surprised and then hesitated for a moment. Finally, still carefully said, "Shenyang, I do have a few words, don't know if I should say it." Suru indifferently said, "Say it, I also know these words. I'm afraid it is not only you alone who wants to say it." Ghostly paused for a moment. He had always known that this Shenyang of his was an extremely intelligent person. Seemed like the grief of losing her husband did not affect her thinking too much. Ghostly lightly coughed and said, "Shenyang, please forgive Disciple's boldness. Disciple understands Shenyang's feelings towards teacher's passing." Speaking till here, his eyes unexpectedly glanced at Tian Bai's body. Couldn't help but felt a sourness in his heart. After a moment, he continued, "Just that, Disciple earnestly asks Shenyang, no matter what, to restrain your grief. Other than that, although Shenyang is grieving, but teacher's funeral affairs should also be arranged as soon as possible. Moreover, Linger's senior sister is also reasonable. We should also inform her to come back to pay respects to teacher." Suru did not turn back and did not speak. Ghostly felt uneasy, slightly lowered his head, quietly said, "Shenyang, if Disciple has said anything bold or rash, please do not mind." Suru shook her head, slowly turned around, looked at Ghostly, said, "You did not say anything wrong. What you said is all right." Ghostly looked at Suru and was shocked. Suru's dressing today was different from the past few days. Although she was still in morning clothes, but her face looked like she had dressed up before. She looked much more spirited and even more beautiful, making one's heart moved. Ghostly lowered his head, for a moment did not know what to say. After hesitating for a long while, said, "Shenyang, Disciple still has one more matter. May I be so bold to ask Shenyang?" Chapter 445. Suru faintly said, "Speak." Ghostly said, "Teacher's death, Disciple and Shenyang feel the same grief. Just that teacher's body really should not be moved, and even more should not be moved to this back mountain." Suru suddenly interrupted, "Are you lecturing me?" Ghostly quickly shook his head, said, "Disciple, don't dare." Suru glanced at him, did not speak, but her face slowly turned gentle, as if she also thought of something. Suddenly her face revealed a mournful expression, said, "Lao Chi, do you know how many years your teacher and I have been married for?" Ghost Li's heart shook, indistinctly felt that Shenyang's words seemed to contain deep grief, great sorrow, just that although he knew it was so, he did not know how to comfort her. Immediately worried, his mouth could only quietly said, "Disciple, don't know." Suru smiled, turned around, slowly sat down beside Tian Bui, quietly said, "Actually, not only you don't know, even I myself have also forgotten. The years in the mountain I spent with the two of them, it was enough for me. Why would I think about how many days had passed?" He often laughed at me for being silly, said if in the future we are unable to cultivate, difficult to ascend the celestial record and fall back into reincarnation, at that moment of life and death separation, I don't know what kind of scene it would be. Her voice gradually became deeper, said, "I asked him that day, what did he want? He said he did not have any other request. If he died before me as a cultivator, he would not want any grand funeral, not even a coffin, come naturally, leave naturally, only asking for a cup of yellow soil at the back mountain of Big Bamboo Valley. That way he can watch over the people at the front mountain day and night, not afraid of loneliness." Before she finished, tears were already streaming down her face. Ghostly clenched his teeth, could not speak. De Huang, who was lying beside, raised its head slightly, looked at Suru, and then lay down again, its tail gently wagging. Suru stared at Tian Bui for a long time. suddenly waved her hand, said, "You go down the mountain first, come back after an hour." Ghostly was taken aback, unconsciously hesitated, called out, "Shenyang." Suru asked, "What is it?" Ghostly hesitated for a moment, finally plucked up his courage and said, "Shenyang, teacher had an agreement with you when he was alive. Disciples naturally do not dare to disobey. Just that before teacher is buried, should we still inform Linger, senior's sister?" Suru was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Very well. You go down the mountain and tell Darren. Let him secretly go to Longsho Valley to call Linger back." Ghostly nodded, turned and left. When he reached the stone steps at the intersection, he couldn't help but look back, saw Suru quietly sitting beside Tianbai's body. Her figure lonely, it really made one sad. His heart ached again, and he hurriedly turned his head around, not daring to look again, and walked away. Along the way, he calmed down a little and unconsciously recalled the strange scenes of the past few days. Suru did not let Song Darren and the rest inform the Qing Yuan Hill branches of the grievous news. This itself was extremely strange. Even Tian Linger was not allowed to be informed. This was even more unreasonable. Today, dealing with Tian Bai's funeral like this, although it was an agreement made by Tian Bui when he was alive, but it was still too hasty. Ghostly sighed in his heart, shook his head. Actually, as a cultivator, they did not place much importance on the matters of the afterlife. Flesh and skin, buried in the soil of the Green Mountains, might not necessarily be a bad thing. He silently thought like this, too lazy to ride the wind, walked down the mountain path. Unknowingly, he had reached the halfway point. Thinking of that year when he first came to Big Bamboo Valley, following big senior brother Song Darren and little senior sister Tian Linger to the back of the mountain, this stretch of road was unimaginably arduous. The past was still vivid in his heart. But he did not know that Linger, senior sister. How was she these few years? A wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he shook his head. Then he suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked forward in surprise. On the mountain path, a white figure suddenly appeared, graceful and elegant, quietly standing. In the morning light, there did not seem to be any worldly aura, quietly staring at him. Ghostly also looked at her. Both of them looked at each other for a long time, but seemed to have nothing to say. The mountain breeze blew gently, blowing her hair and clothes, gently fluttering with the wind. Finally, Ghostly spoke first. Why are you here?" Lu Sweki quietly said, "My teacher asked me to come and pay my respects to Su teacher uncle." Ghostly silently nodded, hesitated for a moment, said, "Teacher's wife is at this back of the mountain. Just that right now she wants to be alone and does not wish for anyone to disturb her. Instructed me to go up after an hour." Lu Sweki also nodded, said, "It's all right, I will wait." Ghostly acknowledged and became silent. Lu Sweki also did not know what to say between the two of them, although they were standing still, but the distance seemed to be further apart. After a long while, Lu Sweki softly said, "Your injuries better?" Ghostly softly said, "Much better." Speaking, he looked up at Lu Sweki, said, "That day, if not for you saving me, I am afraid I would not be standing here, speaking of which I should thank you." Lu Sweki was stunned, looked at Ghostly, said, "That day, my sword." Ghostly suddenly interrupted, "Don't say any more." Lu Sweki's expression darkened, paused, silently lowered her head. Ghostly seemed to be hesitating, then continued, "Those things teacher's wife has told me. She said I have wronged you. I am sorry." Lu Sweki's body shook, raised her head. Ghostly's face was filled with sorrow. His eyes also refused to look at her, but even so, he still slowly said word by word, "Shenyang's words, I naturally believe it. Just that teacher is after all my benevolent teacher who raised me and taught me. I know perhaps I am too selfish. I only hope that you can give me a few more days. I understand, I will wait for you." Lu Sweki suddenly interrupted him. Ghostly was a little surprised, lifted his head, and looked at her. The beautiful lady was biting her lips. Tears seemed to be in her eyes, but her body that seemed to be tensed up seemed to have relaxed in an instant. The corners of her mouth, a faint trace of gratification and smile. All of a sudden, he felt as if something in his heart had cracked open. In a mortal world, a beauty was the most important. That word wait who knew how many vicissitudes, how much deep affection. Looking at that affectionate lady, his lips moved, a surge of tenderness suddenly welled up in his heart. Was about to smile and say something to her, who knew at this moment, from the top of the bamboo forest behind them, a burst of frenzied dog barking was heard. His body suddenly stiffened. That was Da Huang's barking. Ever since he brought his teacher Tian Bai's body back to Big Bamboo Valley, Da Huang had been quietly following his master's body and never made any loud noises, but right now, Da Huang's barking, although weak due to the distance, but it sounded like madness. The extreme despair in the barking, it was something he had never heard in the past 10 years. What exactly happened to make Da Huang suddenly become so hysterical and crazed? That faint worry that had been buried deep in his heart suddenly all gushed out. Ghost Li's face instantly turned pale. Even his hands started to tremble. Lu Sueki was also shocked, but when she saw Ghost Li's expression, she was even more confused, asked, "What is it?" Ghost Li did not answer. His body only trembled slightly. He suddenly roared out loudly, "Teacher's wife." Before he finished, his figure had already turned and dashed up, like the wind and lightning, towards the depths of the bamboo forest. Lu Sueki was extremely intelligent. In a blink, she had already guessed it. For a moment, her face was also pale, her body trembling. If because of Tian Bai's death, Suru's grief caused an accident, what would happen to Ghost Li? She did not dare to imagine. And at that time, how they would face it, she could not even imagine. Looking at the figure that was crazily rushing away, she suddenly felt a sense of helplessness that she had never felt before. It was as if a huge shadow was shrouding her. She wanted to chase after him, but her body and feet seemed to be bound by an invisible force. She couldn't move at all. Only in the depths of her heart, she desperately shouted to herself, "No, no." Chapter 446. Ghost Li was burning with anxiety, dashed forward with all his might. With his current skills, the flowers and trees on both sides of the path were all toppled, like a crack was split open in the sea. The oncoming wind, because of his speed, his face felt a slight pain, but he did not seem to mind. Right now in his heart, there was only Suru in the bamboo forest. Big Huang's barks were still ringing in his ears, extremely frantic. Ghost Li's figure abruptly dashed up from the stone steps, making a sharp piercing sound, dashed up the stone steps. While still in the air, Ghost Li's heart suddenly turned cold, almost could not control himself, almost fell down. On the ground, there were 2 holes the size of a person. Beside them were 2 piles of soil. Looking at the moisture in the soil, it must have been dug by Suru herself. Once he thought of the use of the 2 caves, Ghost Li turned pale, his scalp numb. And Tian Bai's body was still quietly lying there, did not move, but Suru, whom Ghost Li was most worried about, was pouncing on Tian Bai's chest, motionless. Big Huang was facing Suru, barking incessantly. Ghost Li's heart sank. Looking at the slender figure before him, he felt a kind of fear, not daring to face her, not daring to go near her. At this time, behind him, a pale Lu Sueki slowly appeared on the stone steps. She stood far away, silently watching all of this. Ghost Li suppressed his frantic heartbeat, softly called, "Shenyang." Suru's body did not move, did not give any response. Ghost Li slowly walked forward. Each step looked strenuous. Big Huang's barks were still ringing. Finally, he approached Su, quietly said, "Shenyang, don't scare me." His trembling hand touched Suru's shoulder. Ghost Li clenched his teeth, exerted strength, flipped Suru's body over. After a moment, an unexpected smiling face appeared before him. Suru smiled, a trace of gratification. Maybe she was with her husband. Her body was still warm. Her expression was still serene and dignified, just that there was no more vitality. Big Huang was still barking crazily, but his voice was already turning hoarse. Ghost Li's legs softened, sat on the ground. The next moment, his mind was blank. Shenyang is also gone. This was the only cry in his mind, reverberating endlessly in his heart. The next day, all the other branches in Qingyun's sect received the grievous news from Big Bamboo Valley. Head Tian Bui and his wife Suru both passed away. Tian Bui and his wife's position in Qingyun sect was not to be underestimated. They had always been respected. This grievous news in a blink of an eye shook Qingyun sect. For a moment, countless disciples flew over to Big Bamboo Valley to mourn. Tian Linger, who hurried back from Longsho Valley, cried in front of her parents' memorial tablets, and the rest of the elders remembered their old friendship. Although they were all accomplished cultivators, many of them also shed tears, especially Small Bamboo Valley head master, Shuiwen Master, who was the closest to Suru. In this solemn and mournful atmosphere, there were still some unusual traces with Tian Bui couple's position and prestige. The rest of the branch heads were all present, only within Tongtian Peak, although there were quite a number of elders from the previous generation. The head of the branch, Qingyun's sect head, Reverend Daoxian, was nowhere to be seen. This unavoidably made it seem that Tongtian Peak was belittling Big Bamboo Peak branch. Xavion and the rest of the Big Bamboo Valley disciples were all dressed in filial piety, their faces sorrowful, coming to go to fetch their fellow disciples. All were respectful, but when they saw Xiao Yikai and the rest of the main sect disciples, from time to time their faces showed anger. Their words also became much colder. Xiao Yikai and the rest felt guilty and could not say anything, other than smiling bitterly. They could only stand aside and keep quiet. The incense smoke lingered, the sounds of crying incessantly. This sorrowful feeling most likely was the grief for the death of an old friend, lingering in the quiet and beautiful Big Bamboo Valley. People live for one lifetime, not knowing if after death there will really be a spirit. If it was really so, then the old friend who saw all of this from the netherworld, what would he think? But most likely that Tian Bui would not pretend to be sorrowful. A figure floated down from the direction of Qingyun Hill, seemed to be at a loss, a little puzzled at the junction, finally slowly walked over, at noon, alone, entered Heyang City. The streets were bustling with people, although it was not as lively as in the past, but it could be seen that this city was slowly regaining its vitality. Some people passed away in the calamity, some survived, and there were even new children who grew up, generation after generation. The cycle never stopped. Ghostly stood at the street, quietly watching the crowd. Strangers passed by him, like waves and waves, never stopping. He was in the sea of people. All around him were people who were exactly the same as him. They were born, old, sick, dead, quietly and calmly living in the cycle. But why did people want to live? Ghostly suddenly thought. His teacher and teacher's wife passed away, died in front of him. After the heart-wrenching pain, other than numbness, there was only fatigue. In this life, what was left? In this life, he seemed to feel that he was walking on a much longer road than others, and this road he could not see the end. He walked woodenly. Noises were heard from far and near, hawkers' shouts if he was willing. He could even hear the voices of a woman lecturing a child a street away. He could hear it clearly, just that all of these he felt so far away from himself. In a trance, he felt that he was not a human in this world. Before he knew it, he had walked to a place. Looking up, he saw a familiar restaurant sign. Deep in his heart suddenly skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but walk in. The number of customers in the restaurant was pitifully few. Evidently, the business had not recovered from that calamity. The waiter came over, smiled wholeheartedly, and asked, "Customer, do you want to eat or drink?" Ghostly was silent for a moment, could not speak. After coming down from Qingyun Hill, he was in a muddle-headed state, seemed to be unable to lift his spirits. That feeling carried some despair, just like 10 years ago when he witnessed Bai Yao blocking that sword for him. And after these 10 years, he seemed to have lost that craziness, more fatigue. Customer. The waiter's slightly raised voice woke Ghostly. He woodenly shook his head, walked to a secluded seat, and sat down. The waiter followed, still with a smile, said, "Customer, what would you like to eat?" "You hear," he slowly said, suddenly from somewhere deep in his memory. Something flashed. "You hear, do you still have steamed longfish?" The waiter was startled for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Sir, could it be that you used to be a regular customer of our Shanghai court? This steamed longfish was our signature dish back then, but now you can't eat it anymore." Ghostly was taken aback, said, "Why is that?" The waiter shrugged his shoulders, said, "Isn't it all because of those damned demon beasts, That day, when those demon beasts occupied this place, within a radius of several hundred miles, even those fishes in the river outside the city were swept away until today, not to mention longfish that can be used as dishes, even to fry, is hard to find. Ghostly seemed to have lost something. His face, for some reason, dimmed a few more. The waiter sighed for a long while, then remembered it was him, quickly asked, "Customer, why don't you order some other dishes?" Ghostly looked elsewhere in a daze, casually said, "Forget it. Bring a few dishes and wine." The waiter nodded, turned and left. Just that when he was halfway there, another 3 people came in from the entrance. The waiter was shocked, thought to himself that the business had turned for the better today. Hurriedly went up. Unexpectedly, the 3 of them only looked around the shop. Suddenly saw Ghostly, one of them called out. His voice seemed to carry some surprise. Ghostly heard the voice, and it sounded familiar. Turned and looked, was also surprised. As the saying goes, it's a small world. The 3 people standing there were Taniska, Xiao Huan, and Wild Dog. The one who called out was Taniska. Chapter 447. For some reason, seeing the 3 of them, Ghostly suddenly felt a sense of closeness. Although they were not best friends, but with his current state of mind, seeing Zhou Yixian and the rest in the vast sea of people, it was more beautiful than any scenery. Taniska's stunned expression disappeared in a blink. Then, with a face full of smiles, he quickly walked over. The bamboo pole in his hand with immortal guide cloth fluttered in the wind, came to Ghostly, laughed, and said, "Really unexpected. We meet again here." Ghostly revealed a faint smile, although it disappeared in a blink, but still said, "Senior, please take a seat." Taniska nodded, sat down without hesitation. The waiter stood at the side, quietly asked, "Are you all together?" Taniska rolled his eyes at him, said, "Nonsense, if we're not together, can we sit together?" The waiter nodded repeatedly, said, "Yes, yes, then please take a seat. I will go prepare the dishes. We'll be back soon." Taniska laughed nonstop, pulled the waiter over, casually ordered 7 or 8 dishes, 3 or 4 pots of wine. The waiter nodded repeatedly, hurried to prepare. Tawny at the side was not as happy as her grandpa. On the contrary, her face was dark, quite ugly, especially when Taniska pulled the waiter over to order dishes and wine. She looked even more gloomy, wanted to speak several times, but in the end, after the waiter left, she couldn't help but sneered. "Grandpa, you ordered so many dishes. Could it be that you saw your savior here and want a treat to repay him?" Taniska's face darkened, angrily said, "Tawny, what nonsense are you talking? What kind of friendship do we have with Brother Ghostly? How can we be compared with these dishes and wine?" Speaking, he turned his head and smiled at Ghostly, then sighed, shook his head, and said, "Look at this Hyang city. After the catastrophe, the people are not what they used to be. None of them are willing to come to fortune-telling. The way of the world is hard." Xiao Huan's countenance changed, glanced at Ghostly, and then fiercely stared at Taniska. Her face slightly red, but Ghostly seemed not to feel anything, only indifferently said, "Yes, don't worry, Elder. I was once taken care of by you for many days. This time take it as my thanks." Tawny blushed, but Taniska seemed to be pleased, nodded and smiled. "Not bad, not bad. You are worth teaching." Wild Dog Taoist looked at Xiao Huan and again at Ghostly, wanted to speak but stopped. At this time, the waiter served a few plates of cold dishes and 2 pots of wine. Taniska took the wine pot and filled everyone's cup, raised his cup, and said, "We are all people who roam the world. To be able to meet here, it is really a rare fate. Cheers this cup." After speaking, he raised his head and drained the cup in one gulp, and then slightly shook his head, seemed to be satisfied with the taste of the wine. Ghostly looked at him. The corner of his mouth twitched, not sure if he was smiling, but his facial muscles looked extremely stiff. Most likely, even if he smiled, it would not be shown. He slowly raised his cup, put it to his lips. After a moment, he suddenly sighed, with some helplessness and bitterness, as if what he was holding in his hand was the most bitter thing in the world. Unable to drink it, slowly put it back on the table. At this moment, Tawny, who was sitting beside Taniska, could not help but poke at Taniska. "What a rare fate. Don't know who saw someone's figure from afar on the street," shouted and rushed over, planning to eat for free. Taniska's expression did not change, only rolled his eyes at Tawny, said, Child's babble carries no harm. Child's babble carries no harm. Ghostly did not seem to take Xiao Huan's words to heart. He seemed to be absent-minded, deep in thought. Xiao Huan had known him for many years, but this was the first time she saw Ghostly with such an expression. She couldn't help but feel worried, couldn't help but ask Ghostly, "What's wrong? What's the matter?" Ghostly was silent for a moment, but did not answer Tani. Instead said to Tanis Ka, "Senior." Tanis Ka had just poured himself another cup of wine, smiled and said, "What is the matter?" Ghostly's eyes looked hollow, quietly said, "I remember 10 years ago when I was still a young man who had just come down from Qingyan Hill in this Hyang city, you all once did a fortune-telling for me." Tanis Ka, Tani were surprised. Wild Dog Taoist was puzzled. That old matter, he naturally knew nothing about it. Tanis Ka frowned slightly, thought for a moment, said, "Oh, I still remember some of it. Why did you suddenly ask about that matter?" Speaking till here, his face suddenly revealed a mysterious expression, suppressed his voice, and said to Ghostly, "Don't tell me that after 10 years, you still want to say that our fortune-telling was not accurate and intend to get back the fortune-telling money that day?" "Grandpa," Tani scolded Tanis Ka, seemed to be at the end of her patience, pushed Tanis Ka aside, said to Ghostly, "Ghostly big brother, do you have anything on your mind, maybe? You can tell me." Ghostly glanced at Tani, the tiredness in his eyes revealed a rare trace of warmth, but he still shook his head lightly, said, "I don't have anything. I just want to ask old mister a few questions." Tanis Ka tidied his clothes, coughed once. Immediately that celestial demeanor gushed out. For a moment this small restaurant hall seemed to be illuminated by his presence. Only he reigned supreme. "Say it," he indifferently said. "With our friendship, there is nothing to hide, but the life money still has to be given." Until the end, he disregarded Tani's flushed face, winked at Ghostly. Ghostly smiled faintly, with some consolation, patted Tani, who was about to explode from the embarrassment, then turned to Tanis Ka. His face revealed a perplexed expression, said, "Senior, you roam the world. Your knowledge is extraordinary. I have one thing, perplexed in my heart, would like to ask Senior. What do you think the purpose of our life is?" Once the words were spoken, Tani and Wild Dog Taoist were surprised, looked at Ghostly with puzzled expressions. Tanis Ka instead frowned. The teasing expression on his face gradually faded. His expression also turned solemn. He didn't immediately answer. Instead, he muttered to himself for a long while before slowly saying, "Your expression is strange, unlike before. Did something unpleasant happen again?" Ghostly was silent for a moment, quietly said, "My teacher's wife, passed away a few days ago." "Ah." Tani and Wild Dog Taoist were shocked, cried out involuntarily. Tanis Ka frowned, sighed, quietly said, "Tianbi also passed away. Such a pity." Ghostly was silent. Tanis Ka slightly closed his eyes. Then his expression returned to normal, said, "No wonder you look so sorrowful. Just that parting in life and death is human nature. No one can avoid it. You are an extraordinary person. Why must you wallow in it?" The sorrowful expression on Ghost Lee's face deepened, said, "But both of their deaths, it really has something to do with me." Tanis Ka faintly said, "Since it is so, what should be returned by you? Just return it. Why must you torment yourself here?" Ghostly was surprised, stammered, "What should be returned by me? What should be returned by me?" Tanis Ka said, "Let me ask you, when your teacher and teacher's wife passed away, did they hold any grudge against you?" Ghost Lee's head slowly hung down. After a long while slowly said, "No, teacher and teacher's wife's kindness to me is as heavy as a mountain. Until their deaths, they still remembered me, accepted this unfilial and unfilial disciple into their sect." Towards the end, he was already choking with sobs. Tani looked at Ghostly. Unknowingly, her eyes also reddened. Tanis Ka smiled. Faint light swirled in his eyes, as if jumping out of this mortal world. Saw through the ways of the world, said, "Then let me ask you again, when your teacher and teacher's wife passed away, did they have any remorse?" Ghostly hesitated for a moment, slowly shook his head. Tanis Ka smiled. "That's it. You should be happy for them. Dying without regrets. Isn't that the best ending for them?" Ghostly looked up at Tanis Ka. his lips slightly moved, his expression perplexed. Chapter 448. At night, looking into the city from the top of Hyang City Wall, although it could not be said to be a myriad of lights, but the scattered lights still gave one a feeling of warmth. To Ghostly, that was perhaps the most unfamiliar place to him. He silently stared at the lights and then turned around. On the not tall nor sturdy city walls, right now, there was not a single person. The bleak night breeze blew over from the open plains outside Hyang City, brushed past those walls which were scarred by the demon beast catastrophe, blew onto him and Zhou Yixian. For some reason, Xiao Huan and Wild Dog Taoist were not here. Only Zhou Yixian and Ghostly in this night stood at Hyang City Wall. But Tannis Ka looked calm and collected. In one hand, he was still holding the bamboo pole of Immortal Guide. In the other hand, there was a wine flask. Right now, he was drinking a big mouthful, letting out a satisfied sigh. Good wine. With a slight smile, he said to Ghostly, "This wine is still warm. Do you want a sip?" Ghostly silently shook his head, said, "Senior, you drink it yourself." Zhou Yixian laughed, raised his head, and drank a mouthful. Just that after this mouthful, he shook the flask, shrugged his shoulders, threw the flask down the wall, seemed like he had drunk the last mouthful of wine. Not knowing if he felt guilty, that was why he asked Ghostly. This night, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The moonlight like water. The secluded city wall was illuminated by the moonlight. Zhou Yixian, after drinking, looked up at the sky, lost in thought, for a moment did not speak. Ghostly slowly walked to the side of the city wall. His gaze landed on a certain spot on the city bricks. There were several deep claw marks, and near these claw marks, more similar marks were deeply engraved on all the bricks. Ghastly! Those were left by the demon beasts in the catastrophe. Zhou Yixian also walked over, faintly said, "On this wall, where only the two of them were, this old man seemed to have lost some of his usual teasing. Instead, in his eyes, when he looked at Ghostly, there was more bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying mankind." Ghostly stretched out his hand, gently stroked over those deep claw marks. From his fingertips, it was the rough feeling of a brick wall, not knowing how many vengeful spirits had once cried out in these claw marks. He was silent for a long time, said, "Did many of the innocent people in Hyang City die?" Tannis Ka sighed, walked to the edge of the city wall, looked down in his eyes, reflected the lights in the city. Although many of the people had already fled to the north, but at least 50% of the people in Hyang City died innocently, died in the hands of those demon beasts. Ghostly looked at Zhou Yixian, suddenly said, "Senior, those innocent commoners that you said, which one of them are not the same as us, which one of them are not living well in this world. Not to say all, but at least 90% of them, they're all harmless to man and beast, but why would there be this unexpected disaster? And with their ordinary lives, why did it come from?" Zhou Yixian looked at Ghostly, his hand holding the wall, said, "Today you can stand here, and those innocent people died. Let me ask you, what do you think is the reason?" Ghostly was silent for a long time, said, "I am different from them. I practice Taoism. Even if the demon beasts came, I can also avoid them." Zhou Yixian nodded and said, "That is so. You see this, everyone is the same from the big perspective, big rel, just like Tianyin Temple Buddhism said. All living beings are equal. This is the meaning. Actually, according to Buddhism, not only you and us humans, even the ants and ferocious beasts are the same as us." He paused, smiled, and said, "Just that, in this realm, the human world, how can it be something that can be seen clearly? You have great supernatural powers, great power. You can survive in desperate situations. You can easily transcend above the mortal beings. Therefore, all living beings are equal, but in the minute details, it has never been equal." Ghostly looked perplexed, slowly shook his head, and said, "I do not want to transcend above all living beings, and also do not have the benevolent heart to save all living beings, just like although I practice Taoism, but I have no interest in longevity." Zhou Yixian faintly said, "Then what do you want?" Ghostly smiled bitterly. His smile was full of bitterness, quietly said, "It is here. What I want, even I myself do not know." His expression changed. The bright moon in the sky gradually reached its zenith. The moonlight was even more resplendent, spilled down from the sky, elongating his shadow. Zhou Yixian did not speak, only quietly looked at Ghostly, just that in his eyes and expression was completely different from before. Even though standing in front of him was Ghostly, the only person in the world who had practiced Tianshu 4 volumes. His skills were already unfathomable, but Zhou Yixian's figure right now seemed much taller than him. His elegance, his calmness, the night wind passing through the white hair on his temples, and even the brilliance of the bright moon seemed to quietly gather on his side. Just that Ghostly did not notice anything strange. In fact, Zhou Yixian was only quietly standing in front of him, and himself seemed to be immersed in his own thoughts. After a long while, Ghostly smiled bitterly, said, "Seems like I'm really a good-for-nothing. I don't even know why I am alive, what I want." Zhou Yixian calmly looked at Ghostly. A faint smile on his lips said, "You are wrong, young man." Ghostly was startled. This was the first time he heard Zhou Yixian calling him young man, but this was obviously not the main point. After a moment of shock, he said, "May I ask, Senior? You said I am wrong. Where am I wrong?" Zhou Yixian faintly said, "You think you are a good-for-nothing just because you can't figure out this question from what I see? It is exactly the opposite. You are able to figure out this question. You are far better than others in this world." Ghostly was stunned, said, "What?" Zhou Yixian smiled, waved his hand, and said, "Come and look." Ghostly walked to Zhou Yixian, looked down following the direction of his finger. In Heiyang City, under the moonlight, the little lights in the tranquility flickered incessantly. Zhou Yixian looked at the lights. His eyes seemed to have a complicated emotion. After a moment, he quietly said, "What do you see?" Ghostly said, "This is the lights of countless commoners' homes." Zhou Yixian nodded and said, "That's right, it is the lights. Those little lights are like living people. They are all living in this world. Some are happy, some are unhappy, but they still have to live. However, let me tell you, among the multitude of living beings, there are countless people who only live for the sake of living. There is not even 1 in 10,000 people who are like you, who are troubled and reflect on why they live." Ghostly was speechless. He had never thought of this before, but when he heard it from Zhou Yixian, it seemed to be very reasonable. He could not refute. Zhou Yixian looked at him. His face suddenly revealed a sorrowful expression, but this expression was gone in a blink. Then he sighed softly, stretched out his hand, and patted Ghostly's shoulder. Although Ghostly right now could not be said to be shaken to the core, but his state of mind was still shaken, but his cultivation immediately reacted. Almost subconsciously, he wanted to move sideways to avoid Zhou Yixian's palm, but a strange thing suddenly happened. That Zhou Yixian who had always pretended to be mysterious, sloppy, and ordinary, that seemingly floating palm with Ghostly's cultivation, actually stood where he was and could not avoid it, and was gently patted down by Zhou Yixian. Ghostly's heart shook, but before he could react, words that made him even more shocked came out from Zhou Yixian's mouth. "Moreover, you are the only person in this world who has learnt the 4 volumes of Tianshu. How can you be the same as others?" Once the words were out, Ghostly's body shook greatly. The matter of practicing the 4 volumes of Tianshu had always been a secret. In fact, the 3rd volume of Tianshu from the Celestial Emperor Treasury and the 4th volume of Tianshu from Tianyin Temple's wordless Jade Wall. Even Lu Sueki and those Tianyin Temple monks did not know that those mystical writings were of the same lineage of Tianshu. Only he who had practiced from the beginning to the end understood that these were the 4 volumes of Tianshu. But right now, Zhou Yixian in front of him clearly, plainly revealed this secret. How could he not be shocked? For a moment his face was filled with disbelief, staring at Zhou Yixian. Zhou Yixian faintly smiled, said, "Although you are shocked, but you don't have to be like this." Ghostly carefully assessed the old man in front of him. After a long time, suddenly smiled, took a step back, straightened his clothes, respectfully bowed, said, "Junior is rude. In the past I have neglected Senior, just that there is a question in my heart that I do not understand. Hope Senior can solve it for me." Zhou Yixian's expression was calm. This world-famous figure in front of him was so respectful to him. He did not seem to feel embarrassed at all, only said, "The question in your heart. If it is someone else who can tell you, With your power of understanding and the profoundness of Tian Shu, how can you not understand it? Ghostly was silent, slowly said, could it be that Senior thinks the question in my heart is actually unsolvable? Zhou Yixian smiled and shook his head, said, wrong. The question in your heart should be solved by yourself, the Tian Shu that you practice, and that there should be something close to understanding one's own nature. Ghostly pondered for a moment, nodded and said, yes, understanding one's own nature. Buddha is in the heart and not outside the body. This is the similarity between Tian Shu and Buddhism. Zhou Yixian said, so it is like this. What is the purpose of one's life? It should be understood by yourself. Old man may be able to give you some pointers, but I cannot say it to you. Then he smiled and clasped his hands, walked to the side. Ghostly was silent again. After a long time, the perplexed expression on his face did not fade, said, life, death, farewell, separation. I only see these 4 words, life may. I ask Senior, is human nature bitter? Zhou Yixian smiled, said, wrong, wrong. Your life is full of ups and downs. You think everyone is bitter. It is not so. Let me ask you, do you think your life is bitter? Ghostly was startled, opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. Zhou Yixian already smiled, said, why, it is hard to say, right? Take your recently passed teacher and Shenyang, for example. Do you think they are bitter? Ghostly stammered. Teacher and Shenyang, the Zhou Yixian solemnly said, Tian Bai died a worthy death. He died without regrets. Left with a smile. Your Shenyang Su had deep love with your teacher, did not wish to live alone. You think she committed suicide out of sorrow, but do you not know where her soul returned to be able to reunite with her husband, was instead her happiest thing? Ghostly was stunned, for a moment could not speak. Zhou Yixian indifferently said, you grieve for Tian Bai and his wife's passing, but do not know they may be the ones who understand and have no regrets. Measuring others by yourself? Isn't it ridiculous? Speaking until here, Zhou Yixian suddenly smiled, looked at Ghostly, and said, are you afraid of death? Ghostly hesitated, quietly sighed, said, I am afraid. Zhou Yixian said, oh, I want to ask you, what are you afraid of? Is it the word death itself? Ghostly silently shook his head, said, since I have no interest in immortality, naturally I don't care about death. I am afraid that after I die, my wish will not be fulfilled. Zhou Yixian smiled, said, that's it. You can see past life and death, but in your heart there are more important things than life and death. Instead of asking me all sorts of questions, why don't you think about these more important things? Ghostly frowned, his eyes brightened, seemed to have understood, but he did not smile. Instead, he sank into deeper contemplation. Zhou Yixian did not disturb him, quietly walked to the side, looked up, saw the bright moon in the sky. Moonlight, like water, spilled down. In the wilderness, the night wind whistled. The stars moved, the firmament boundless. He stared for a long time, suddenly let out a deep sigh. Ghostly's voice suddenly came from behind. Senior, is there something in your heart that you cannot see through? Me? Zhou Yixian did not turn back, still staring at the bright moon in the distant horizon. After a long while, he was heard saying indifferently, since I am still wandering in this world, I also have something that I cannot see through. Oh, what is it? Zhou Yixian smiled, said, what I cannot see through is this reincarnation. Qingyan Hill, Small Bamboo Valley. All along, there were only female disciples in Small Bamboo Valley. Therefore, the atmosphere here was different from the other branches of Qingyun. It had always been quiet and peaceful. Even in the day, it was often quiet. Only the chirping of birds and the fragrance of flowers reverberated in this beautiful peak. But ever since Shui Wen Master brought a group of disciples, returned from the funeral in Big Bamboo Valley, the atmosphere in Small Bamboo Valley, in the tranquility, there was some solemnity and oppression. Many of the young Small Bamboo Valley female disciples saw for the first time Shui Wen Master could not conceal her loneliness and sorrow, and with her current cultivation, she should have long ago concealed her emotions. Wen Min had always been the one who understood Shui Wen Master the most. She had long sent word to the sisters, told them to be careful, especially not to talk or laugh loudly, in case they accidentally angered their teacher. Under such persuasion, Naturally, Small Bamboo Valley was solemn. And after returning from Big Bamboo Valley, Shueisha Master locked herself in that bamboo forest abode. Did not appear again. Min and the rest of the disciples boldly went to pay their respects, but were not allowed to enter, making Min and the rest worried. This day, Min had already not seen Shueisha Master for a day and a night. She was anxious and asked Lu Sueki to come along. Lu Sueki looked like she was in a bad mood, was not willing to come, but after Min's persuasion, she was also worried about Shueisha Master, so followed Min. Min and Lu Sueki came to this bamboo forest, stood outside the abode. Min signaled to Lu Sueki. Lu Sueki hesitated for a moment, walked up, gently knocked, said, "Teacher, disciple Lu Sueki and Wen's senior sister have something to ask." Silence in the abode. No one answered. Lu Sueki and Min looked at each other. Min frowned. The worry on her face deepened. Actually, with Shueisha Master's character, she was also different from ordinary people in the past, not to mention ignoring her disciples. It was also common for her to suddenly disappear for a few days. But for some reason, Min and the rest had just returned from Big Bamboo Valley's funeral, more or less understood the inside story, and seemed to be sensitive to these actions. Min coughed, slightly raised her voice, said, "Teacher, this morning, Xiao Ikai's senior brother sent someone to deliver a letter. It is here, disciple will bring it in." In the abode, it was still silent. Min inhaled deeply, stepped forward, pushed open the door. Lu Sueki followed closely behind her, also walked in. Both of them walked into the house, glanced around. Both of their delicate brows frowned. The abode was not very big. The furnishings in the house were also simple. At a glance, both of them did not see Shueisha Master. Min sighed, said, "Teacher is actually not here. I wonder where she has gone to?" Lu Sueki silently shook her head. After a moment, said, "Senior sister, we better go back first. Maybe we are overthinking, although teacher and Suru teacher uncle have deep feelings, but at most they will be sad for a while. I think nothing will happen." Min nodded, said, "We can only do so, but I still feel uneasy." Lu Sueki sighed, shook her head slightly, turned and walked out. Min again glanced into the house, took out a sealed letter from her bosom, gently placed it on the table, and then walked out. The next moment, the door was closed by her from behind, making a light sound. In the house, again fell into silence. Chapter 449. Walking out of the abode, Min saw Lu Sueki standing at the side and walked over, said, "Junior sister, are you going back now?" Lu Sueki shook her head slightly, said, "Since I'm out, I want to walk around. Always sitting in the house, I feel bored." Min nodded, said, "That's true. Then you be careful. I will go back first." Lu Sueki nodded slightly, said, "Yes, senior sister, take care." Min smiled, turned and left. Watching her figure gradually disappearing in the bamboo forest, Lu Sueki stood there in silence for a moment, not knowing where to go, and so strolled. The bamboo forest was deep. Everywhere was verdant. The mountain breeze blew past. The bamboo branches swayed with the wind, making rustling sounds. On the slightly moist ground, new shoots broke out. From time to time, the sharp heads of the bamboo shoots could be seen poking out from the ground, full of vitality. Far away, where the bamboo branches were dense, clear bird cries were heard. Even in the surrounding air, a unique bamboo fragrance wafted. Lu Sueki inhaled deeply. This place did not carry the mundane atmosphere. It had always been the favorite of cultivators like them, and also the reason why every cultivator kept away from the mundane world. Just that, although the body was far away from the mundane world, but that mundane heart and affection seemed to have never left. Walking lightly like that, strolling, unknowingly, Lu Sueki suddenly realized she had walked to the back of the mountain again. She smiled bitterly, although she did not expect to come here today. But maybe because she came here often, this pair of feet actually walked on its own. But since she was already here, Lu Sueki did not turn back, continued to walk slowly up the mountain. The stone steps ascended. Not far away, it was Small Bamboo Valley's secluded Wanwa platform. Right now, it was daytime. In addition, Master Shueisha's mood was not good recently. No one came to this secluded place. The surroundings were even quieter. Luckily, Lu Sueki was used to this tranquility. walked up on her own, every grass and tree, every rock and rock, to her, could not be more familiar. Unexpectedly, when she stepped onto the platform, she was stunned for a moment. In front of the platform stood a figure, standing alone, her robes fluttering in the mountain breeze. That figure looked very familiar. It was her and one Min teacher, Shewa master, who they had not been able to find. Lu Sweki was stunned, walked up, bowed to Master Shuiwe, said, "Teacher." Shuiwe master's body shook, seemed to realize that someone was coming from behind, turned around, looked at Lu Sweki, nodded and said, "It is Sweki." Lu Sweki looked at Shuiwe master, saw her teacher's face slightly pale, still sad, but right now even more desolation. She was worried and said, "Master, the wind is strong here. You have to take care of yourself." Shuiwe master smiled, said, "Usually you stand here all day, and I don't see anything happening to you. Although my old bones are not as strong as you young people, but I am not weak to the point of being unable to withstand the wind." Lu Sweki was shocked, quickly said, "Teacher, disciple does not mean that. I am." Shuiwe master looked slightly tired, waved her hand. A trace of bitter smile revealed at the corner of her mouth, said, "I know. You don't have to explain." Lu Sweki was silent, stood beside Shuiwe master, but for a moment did not know what to say. And Shuiwe master also did not seem to have the intention to speak. Both of them were silent. After an unknown period of time, Shuiwe master gazed afar, suddenly said, "Do you think this full moon platform scenery is beautiful?" Lu Sweki was surprised, did not know why Shuiwe master suddenly asked, but she still honestly answered her teacher. As the saying goes, scenery is often at the perilous peak. Here the dangerous cliffs are abrupt, solitary cliffs suspended in the air. Looking from above, sea of clouds like waves, green mountains accompanying. It is indeed a beautiful place. Shuiwe master nodded slightly. Her eyes, slightly blurred, unhurriedly said, "Actually, many years ago, when your Suru teacher uncle was still cultivating in Small Bamboo Valley, she was also like you, loved the scenery here the most, and often sneaked here alone to play." Lu Sweki was surprised, looked up at Shuiwe master. Shuiwe master sighed softly, said, "Su junior sister and I grew up together. I was only 1 year earlier than her when I joined her teacher Jinya master. When we were young, we ate at the same table, slept in the same bed. We were really like sisters. Her temperament was usually more lively than me, but she loved to sneak here alone. Whenever she suffered grievances, she would also come to this full moon platform, sulking alone." Shuiwe master spoke until here. Her lips moved, seemed to recall some of the past events, some smile, but before the smile appeared, it was replaced by a deeper vacant look. "But ever since she got married, she never came here again." Lu Sweki quietly listened to Shuiwe master's words, quietly said, "Teacher, when Suru teacher uncle married Big Bamboo Valley teacher Uncle Tian, you were not happy in your heart." Shuiwe master was stunned for a moment, and then shook her head slightly, sighed, said, "Although Tian Bai's temper is not good, his temperament is rather surly, but he is definitely a good match. Your Suru teacher uncle marrying him is her good fortune, and also she has good taste." Lu Sweki heard until here, was really surprised. In the past, everyone knew that Shuiwe master did not like Tian Bui, but unexpectedly she thought so in her heart, could not help but ask, "Then you still treated Tian teacher uncle that way in the past?" Halfway through, she suddenly stopped. Shuiwe master smiled, said, still scowling at him, "Making sarcastic remarks, is it?" Lu Sweki blushed, said, "Disciple does not dare to think so." Shuiwe master indifferently said, "I usually treat him like that. It is not something taboo. What is there to worry about? But although Tian Bui and I do not get along, but honestly speaking, he is still not bad. In our Qinyan sect, not many can compare to him." Speaking until here, Shuiwe master seemed to suddenly think of something, frowned slightly, said, "Tian Bai's first disciple is called Xavion?" Lu Sweki nodded, did not know why Shuiwe master would suddenly ask about Xavion, said, "Yes, now Song senior brother has already taken over the position of Big Bamboo Valley head." "Teacher, why did you suddenly think of Song senior brother?" Shuiwe master was silent for a long while, said, "That one Min's senior sister of yours. Is she flirting with this Xavion? Lu Sueki was then shocked. For a moment, did not know what to say. Wunmin and Xavion only saw each other's affection. Most people knew. The sisters in Small Bamboo Valley usually used this matter to joke with Wunmin. Just that Tian Bui once went up the mountain to propose for Xavion's sake, but was flatly rejected by Shui Wen Master, making Wunmin secretly dejected and depressed for many days. Now suddenly being asked by Shui Wen Master, Lu Sueki's thoughts turned, but did not know whether to say it directly or to hide a little more for Wunmin's senior sister. Just that what kind of experience was Shui Wen Master? Seeing Lu Sueki's few hesitations, she could see most of it, shook her head, sighed deeply. Lu Sueki could not help but feel anxious. Her relationship with Wunmin was extremely good. Although her own love life was not smooth, but she hoped that this senior sister who had been taking care of her since young could have a good husband. After hesitating for a while, still plucked up her courage and said, "Teacher, actually Wunmin's senior sister, she had only spoken a few words when Shui Wen Master indifferently said, forget it. Find a day and let Wunmin marry over." Lu Sueki for a moment was stunned, almost could not believe her own ears. The expression on her face also showed. Shui Wen Master glanced at her, smiled, and said, "Why, is it that all of you disciples have always thought that I am an old stubborn, inflexible, and unwilling to help the disciples' good deeds?" Lu Sueki was extremely happy for Wunmin, quickly smiled and said, "Teacher, what are you saying? How would disciples dare to think so? I will first thank you on behalf of Wunmin's senior sister." Shui Wen Master looked at Lu Sueki's rare, sincere smile. The corner of her mouth moved, but she sighed again, turned around, clasped her hands behind her back, and stood, looking towards the distant sea of clouds, silently. Lu Sueki, in her joy, saw Shui Wen Master's unusual expression, cautiously asked, "Teacher, why did you suddenly think of this matter?" Shui Wen Master was silent for a moment, did not answer, and instead asked, "Sueki, you also followed me to Big Bamboo Valley. What do you think of your Su teacher uncle's death?" Lu Sueki's expression turned solemn. After a moment of silence, solemnly said, "Disciple thought Su teacher uncle and Tian teacher uncle were deeply in love, followed them, and did not show any signs of pain." "Yes." Shui Wen Master sighed softly, in a daze, after a long while said, "I originally did not want you all to be disturbed by love and delay your cultivation, but this lifetime of cultivation. In the end, what is the result?" Lu Sueki did not know what Shui Wen Master meant. For a moment did not dare to reply. Shui Wen Master slowly said, "Longevity, it is still illusory, a lifetime of bitter cultivation, but in exchange for hundreds of years of wasted time, your Su teacher uncle regarded 100 years of cultivation and life as nothing. This determination and foresight is really much stronger than me." Lu Sueki, for some reason, suddenly felt a sourness, called out, "Teacher, a lifetime of cultivation, a lifetime of cultivation. You've cultivated the Tao, but you've lost your humanity. Why bother?" Shui Wen Master heaved a long sigh, indifferently said, "Actually, what is Tao? What is called attaining Tao? I have cultivated for a lifetime. Until today, I am really confused." Lu Sueki stood aside, did not dare to speak. Shui Wen Master stood silently. After a long while, suddenly shook her head, seemed unwilling to continue thinking, turned and walked down the mountain. Lu Sueki watched her back, called out, "Teacher, where are you going?" Chapter 450. Shui Wen Master paused, said, "Wunmin's matter, I have made up my mind. You go and speak to her." "But—" Her voice paused, and then turned around. Her face had some pity, looked at Lu Sueki and said, "But you, Sueki, have you ever thought about yourself?" Anan was surprised, said, "What?" Then she understood. Her face turned pale, slowly revealed a helpless smile, quietly said, "Teacher, disciple's life is not good. Dare not to have delusions." Shui Wen Master looked at her own beautiful disciple, her white clothes fluttering, even more otherworldly, but the sadness on her face, unknown how much had accumulated. Shui Wen Master suddenly felt an inexplicable heartache, called Sueki. Anan looked up, looked at Shui Wen Master. Shui Wen Master indifferently said, "Sueki, The path of love is arduous, but you are not willing to turn back. Teacher also cannot say anything to you. Just that you and I are teacher and disciple. I also do not wish to see you like this. If there is a turn for the better in the future, the rules in Qingyan sect, I will take care of it for you. You don't have to worry. Ainan's body shook greatly, could not help but called out, Teacher, but for a moment did not know what to say. Shuiwen Master smiled at her, but then sighed, turned and left. Not long after, a figure disappeared below the stone steps. Only in the mountain breeze, indistinctly her soft voice was heard. Ask the world, what is love? Ainan stood there. For a moment her heart was in a mess, a few agonies. Her mind raced, but still could not think of any answer. Only in that moment of absent-mindedness, she suddenly thought. Not long ago, in that abandoned morgue outside Heong City, Tian Bui seemed to have said similar words to her. Majestic Fox Mountain, Ghost King Sect. A pretty figure appeared in the mountain tunnel where Ghost King's sect headquarters was, different from all the dull gray things around. When this figure moved, it seemed to glimmer with dazzling light, bringing a touch of color to the oppressive atmosphere here. From time to time, Ghost King's sect disciples passed by. Almost none of them were not attracted by her, but wherever that lady's eyes swept past, they all quickly walked away, as if not daring to have more contact with her. Even in this Ghost King sect, she seemed to be a special existence. And she was really special, her brows like a painting, extremely charming. Although compared to the nine-tailed celestial fox Xiaobai, she seemed to have more gentleness. But even so, with her identity as Hehuan sect Gongzi Miao, Jean Pinger now openly standing in this Ghost King sect territory, she still seemed to be an eyesore. But Jean Pinger clearly did not care about the gazes around her. To her, she was already used to being the center of attention at the end of that demon beast catastrophe. In the southern border, 10,000 great mountains in the subdue devil ancient cave, she finally escaped with great difficulty and returned to Central Plains. No one knew about the twists and turns. She also did not tell anyone about it. At this moment, she only had one direction. The Ghost King wanted to see her. After another junction, the tunnel ahead split into two. Jean Pinger stopped, glanced at the tunnel on the left. A glint seemed to flash past her eyes, and then disappeared, striding towards the tunnel on the right. Not long ago, that sudden strange earthquake. The damage to Ghost King sect could still be seen everywhere, mainly on the mountain rock walls. Many big or small cracks could be seen from time to time, and in this well-ventilated tunnel, there was still a faint smell of blood, lingering. This faint smell of blood, Jean Pinger naturally also felt it, just that she was surprised but did not show it on her face. Her current position in Ghost King sect was not comparable to the Hehuan sect in the past. Naturally, she would not be a busybody. Just that she was still secretly shocked. With her knowledge and experience, she could naturally feel that this smell of blood was very strange. In the midst of her thoughts, she had already followed the tunnel to Ghost King's house. She stopped and was about to call someone to inform. Suddenly the stone door rumbled open. Ghost King's laughter was heard from inside the house, said, "Is it Pinger? Quickly come in." Jean Pinger was secretly shocked, but she forced a smile on her face, smiled and said, "Yes," and walked in. The stone room was spacious and bright. The furnishings, although not luxurious, but dignified and grand. Ghost King was sitting behind a table. In front of him was a large piece of white paper. Beside him were the 4 treasures of the study. Seemed like he was practicing calligraphy. Jean Pinger glanced at Ghost King, smiled sweetly, and said, "Sect head seems to be in a good mood today. Why did you think of writing?" Ghost King looked up at Jean Pinger, smiled. Jean Pinger's smile suddenly froze. She felt that Ghost King's gaze was like 2 sharp blades stabbing at her. Meeting his gaze, her eyes felt an indistinct stinging pain. But fortunately, Ghost King quickly retracted his gaze, still looking at the white paper in his hand, at the same time beckoned and said, "Come over and take a look. What do you think of my word?" Jean Pinger was secretly shocked. In the past, when she interacted with Ghost King, she had never felt this way. How was it that in just a short period of time, Ghost King's skills seemed to have advanced by leaps and bounds? But she was after all not that kind of shallow person. She pondered in her heart but piled a smile on her face, walked over, bringing along a wave of fragrance, smiled and said, "I am but a layman who knows nothing about calligraphy. Sect head coming over to see me is really making things difficult for me." Ghost King laughed, did not reply, and moved aside. Jean Pinger stood beside the table, looked at the white paper on the table, reflected in her eyes on the huge piece of white paper. There was only one big word written: kill. Every stroke of this word was like an iron stroke or a silver hook. The force exerted was extremely heavy, as if it was going to burst out of the paper. The ferocious intent was clear, definitely not the upright atmosphere of a regular script, also not like a cursive script with its unrestrained weight, free expression. All of it was a murderous intent, rolling over. Jean Pinger was shocked, and then for some reason she felt a cold gaze from beside her, but Ghost King's amiable laughter was heard, said, "Pinger, what do you think of this word?" Jean Pinger was all smiles, like the spring breeze brushing past. The entire room was filled with spring. She smiled and said, "Secthead's words are really nice. Even if I practice for 10 years, I will not be able to write such words." Ghost King indifferently looked at Jean Pinger. Under his gaze, Jean Pinger felt an indistinct chill seeping out, but the smile on her face did not diminish, until she herself felt that the muscles on her face were aching from maintaining the smile. Ghost King suddenly looked away. Jean Pinger then secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, she was secretly shocked. This time back, Ghost King's bearing was completely different from before. His murderous aura was like a huge wave, pressing over, and looking at Ghost King, he did not seem to have any intention of concealing it. This was totally different from his usual style. Could it be that these few days, something happened again? Jean Pinger was secretly recalling. Ghost King had already opened his mouth and said, "Priest, why don't you also come and take a look? What do you think of this word that I have written?" Jean Pinger's heart was shaken again. She turned to look in shock. In the corner of the stone chamber, there was another person, dressed in Taoist robes, his face solemn. Jean Pinger's thoughts turned rapidly. She was even more bewildered after she entered this stone chamber, although she was shocked by Ghost King's strange murderous aura for a while. But this person was able to conceal his presence and stand at the side without being discovered by her. It seemed that he should not be underestimated. That Taoist unhurriedly walked up, looked at the words on the white paper for a while. After a long time, said, "Good words." Ghost King's eyes were still cold, but his face was still smiling, and said, "What's good about it?" That Taoist said, "This word is good. The strokes and the meaning of the words complement each other. The words have murderous intent, penetrating the words, rare, rare." Ghost King stared at that Taoist. The Taoist's expression did not change. Slowly stepped back, stood 3 chi away from Jean Pinger. Ghost King's expression suddenly laughed out, said, well said, priest's words have deeply resonated with me." That Taoist bowed his head slightly, considered his thanks. Jean Pinger could not help but take another look at that Taoist. Ghost King said, "Pinger, let me introduce you. This is our sect's helper, Taoist Song Song." Jean Pinger's brows raised, a sharp glint flashed past her eyes, and then she looked at Song Song with a smile, said, long time to meet you, Taoist Song Song nodded to Jean Pinger. At this moment, Ghost King said, "Pinger, this time I called you back. It is because our holy sect is about to have a rare event that happens once in 1,000 years. We need your help." Jean Pinger smiled and said, "Sect head, just feel free to instruct. Pinger will definitely do her best." Ghost King smiled and said, "The specific details I have roughly briefed Taoist Song Song. You can ask him later and you will know, although this matter is not urgent, but it still needs to be done quickly. Both of you can go and discuss first." Jean Pinger nodded, together with Taoist Song Song bowed to Ghost King at the same time and left. The stone door slowly closed. The two of them walked side by side in the tunnel, did not speak for a while. Only when they passed by that 3-way junction, Jean Pinger could not help but glance at the path on the left. And at this moment, Taoist Song Song's voice was heard. "Ghostly Vice Sec Head has already left majestic Fox Mountain for many days, has not returned yet." Jean Pinger frowned. Her eyes also turned cold, turned to look at Taoist Song Song, but Taoist Song Song turned a blind eye. After saying that, he walked ahead on his own. Jean Pinger's face, after a moment, slowly revealed a mysterious smile, sneered and followed him. Chapter 451. Different from the undercurrents in the Central Plains, thousands of miles away in the southern border. After the demon beast catastrophe, the various tribes of the southern border quietly rebuilt their homes. Although this was the place that suffered the most, but the world was so big, no one seemed to remember this place. Anyway, the southern border wastelands were not considered by the wealthy people of the Central Plains. In the 7-Mile Cave, where the Meow people resided, the scars caused by the demon beasts could still be seen everywhere, but on the stretch of ruins, many brand new houses had been built. At the mountainside of the 7-Mile Cave, at that mysterious altar entrance, there were still quite a number of worshippers going in and out. At this moment, with 1,000 things waiting to be done, the ancestors' protection to the Meow people was exceptionally important. The Meow people worked at sunrise, rested at sunset. The days passed by like that day. Watching as the sun set in the west, night fell. Many of the Meow people returned to their homes, relaxed their weary bodies after dinner. In the starlight spilling down from the numerous stars in the night sky, they gradually fell into a deep sleep. Just that in the dead of night, a white figure suddenly appeared in the 7-Mile Cave, like a faint glow in the darkness, a few ups and downs in the quiet valley. It had already quietly approached the foot of the altar at the back of the mountain. At the entrance to the mountain, although it was late at night, but there were still 2 Meow soldiers guarding. Just as this night breeze suddenly blew over, they only felt a flash of white light as fast as lightning flashed past. A faint fragrance like flowers blooming in the night involuntarily fell into a trance. After a while, they regained consciousness, just that short period of absent-mindedness was too short. Both of them thought that it was just an occasional nap after exhaustion. After cursing themselves in their hearts, the 2 Meow people pulled themselves together and once again carefully guarded their own tribe's sacred place. Just that behind them, a ghostly white graceful figure, like slowly seeping out from the darkness, appeared on the platform at the altar entrance, dressed in white, extremely charming. The starlight in the sky seemed to be attracted by her. Who else could it be but Xiao Bai? She looked around a few times and then looked into the dark cave. Although it was still dark, Xiao Bai's eyes slowly moved and a faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Then she seemed to feel something, silently shook her head, and softly sighed. The defense here was much worse than what she had expected. Completely unlike the day when she and Ghostly came here to seek an audience with the great shaman. Not to mention those sturdy soldiers at the foot of the mountain, this altar should have many shamans with witchcraft skills and would not be as undefended as this. It seemed like the demon beast calamity to the Meow tribe was really a heavy loss. Actually, not only the Meow tribe, in the entire world, because of that beast deity alone, how many innocent people lost their families, lost their homes, and became destitute. It was really hard to say. Xiao Bai shook her head, did not think too much. Her body swept up like turning into a faint white light, swept straight into the cave. Most of the cave was the same as before. The path did not change, even if there was a torch on the wall at a distance. It was still the same as before, just that under Xiao Bai's senses, she discovered that in this cave there were very few people. Even if there were a few, their breathing was slow and steady, most likely asleep. Xiao Bai was too lazy to bother. According to her memory, she quietly flew in the cave with her 1,000 years of cultivation, not to mention these lowly Meow priests. Even those highly cultivated cultivators might not be able to detect her. After a while, she had already arrived at the spacious cave, which was once the great shaman's residence. Arriving here, Little White stopped, frowned, looked into the cave. Although it was far away, she could already feel that there was someone inside, and this person seemed to be different from the others she had sensed before. At least he was not sleeping. In the cave, that raging fire was still emitting bright light in the shadow of the light. That dog deity statue was faintly discernible. Xiao Bai's eyes stared at the dog head on the statue for a moment, and then looked away at the fire. A young figure sat in front of the fire, his back facing the cave entrance. Xiao Bai could not see his face clearly, could only roughly make out that it was a young man. Facing the blazing fire, he sat on the ground, but his movements did not stop for a moment, occasionally drawing mysterious and strange patterns, at the same time piously chanting something in the Meow language. Xiao Bai quietly came to the back of the man. The light from the fire gradually shone on her body and pulled out a long shadow behind her. She quietly listened to that young man's deep voice like a song, reverberating in this ancient cave. Seemed to be telling something? That deep echo seemed to be endless. Looking from the side, that young Miao priest's face was full of piety, most likely already completely immersed in that illusory world. Xiao Bai's face gradually revealed a trace of bewilderment and then gently sighed. This strange sound immediately startled that young Miao priest. His body shook and was about to turn around to check. Just that before he could move, that delicate fair hand flashed past his eyes and then landed on his head, lightly patted. The young Miao priest's eyes suddenly rolled back. His body trembled a few times. In a moment, he lost consciousness and fell to the ground beside him. That mysterious chanting in the cave, together with that echo, quietly quietened down. Xiao Bai looked at that young face, suddenly smiled, softly said, "Whether there is a dog deity or not, and whether that dog deity will protect your tribe, I don't know, but with such a devout and determined person like you around, I believe the great shaman can be rest assured." After speaking, she shook her head slightly, walked past the young priest and the fire, walked past the side, headed straight for that dog deity statue. All along, the Miao people believed in the dog deity, thought that the dog deity had bestowed them a new life, protected the tribe, and continued to propagate. Therefore, even the priests in this cave did not dare to go near this statue easily. And right now, Xiao Bai was standing in front of this dog deity statue carved from black stone. The statue was entirely carved from the southern border's special black stone, the luster shining in the black. Indistinctly, there was a faint silver glow emitting from its body. Xiao Bai had a deep understanding of the southern border. Naturally, she knew that this was not the dog deity miracle that many Miao people believed in, but just an extremely rare species in the black stone. Within it, there were faint silver shavings forming this mysterious, beautiful glow. But the purpose of her trip was naturally not to admire this Miao dog deity statue. After a moment, her attention was focused on the dog's head. Not knowing which ancient era this statue was passed down from, but the creator was obviously a great craftsman. Needless to say, the skill in carving, it was lifelike, and what was more impressive was that the fine hairs on the dog's head could be seen clearly, without the slightest ambiguity, if not for the fact that the stone was obvious. One would almost think that it was a black dog with its mouth slightly opened. And on the dog deity statue's head, the most conspicuous place was a pair of eyes. Looking at the material, it seemed to be black stone too, but the two black stones embedded in the eye sockets were very different from the surroundings, more pure and deep. The distant raging fire, only reflected in the statue's eyes, in a trance. There seemed to be a spirit, quietly staring at Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai suddenly felt a jolt, stepped back. Immediately the pressure on her body eased. Her consciousness immediately awakened. She frowned slightly, looked at the deity statue again, snorted and said, "There's actually such an enchantment to confuse one's mind." Then she seemed to be in deep thought, pondered for a moment, but there was a trace of confusion, softly said, "But this is obviously Central Earth skills. Why would it appear here?" She quietly thought for a moment, lightly shook her head, tossed aside this senseless thought. Right now, to her purpose of coming here, this naturally was not what she wanted to investigate. She looked at the statue again, and finally, her eyes fell on the lifelike pair of eyes. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, but then she reached out her hand and gently pressed on the pair of black, pure, and deep eyes. Chapter 452. In the ancient cave, a muffled roar was suddenly heard. The sound was not loud, but it seemed to make the spacious cave tremble. The ancient dog deity statue was in front of Xiao Bai. In that low roar, it slowly descended, sank into the ground, until most of its body was covered. Only the deity's dog head was left on the ground. Behind the deity statue, a smooth stone wall appeared, different from the surrounding stone walls. It seemed to be shrouded by a faint layer of black gas, making it hard to see clearly. However, this was no longer a problem for Xiao Bai. She revealed a faint smile and walked forward. She extended her hand and waved her sleeve. A light wind swept from her hand and swept past the stone wall. Immediately, the black gas was blown away, following which, in the deep darkness on the stone wall, a dot of golden light suddenly appeared. The next moment, another dots of golden light like a miracle suddenly descended into this secular world, surged out from the stone wall like a spring, forming scenes of magical pictures and words. Even Xiao Bai, who was standing not far away, her face was also slightly lit up by the golden light. Xiao Bai stared at the mysterious picture in front of her that appeared one by one, the lights circling around it. Her eyes moved. She looked at it line by line. In front of her was the last secret of the ancient shaman tribe that had been passed down for countless years. Her eyes jumped, sometimes frozen, sometimes happy. Finally, she saw the gigantic fire dragon picture that roared towards the sky, wild and untamed. Xiao Bai let out a deep breath. A smile appeared on her lips. After that, she confirmed again and then closed her eyes, as if silently memorizing these pictures in her heart. When she opened her eyes again, the watery eyes swept over the stone wall, muttered to herself, "Didn't expect those guys to still have this trick up their sleeves. Could it be that they already knew the shaman tribe was going to be destroyed?" As she spoke, she faintly smiled, as if she was too lazy to bother with the troubles of the ancient people from who knows how many years ago. Just as she was about to turn around, she suddenly frowned, and her gaze suddenly focused on the last part of the golden pattern. Under the wild and untamed giant fire dragon pattern, there seemed to be a small piece of black gas that was different from the rest, still adhering to the stone wall. Xiao Bai was slightly surprised. After a moment, she still did not want to let it go, was about to check. Suddenly her heart moved, abruptly turned around, her eyes instantly coldly looked over. The huge cave was empty except for the crackling sound of the firewood crackling from time to time. Other than the young priest who was still unconscious on the ground, there was no one else. Xiao Bai's eyes drifted past the young priest, and then carefully looked around the cave. After confirming that there was nothing strange, she frowned slightly, slowly turned around. Could it be that she had been in this strange place for too long, and had become a little suspicious? Xiao Bai shook her head, smiled bitterly, composed herself, then raised her hand. A light breeze blew out, but the strength was a little stronger than before. After a moment, the remaining black gas finally dissipated. On the stone wall, there were indeed a few lines of words. Xiao Bai's spirit was lifted, looked carefully. After a moment, surprise and joy suddenly appeared on her face, blurting out, So the soul-summoning art is here." But as her eyes moved, the joy gradually disappeared and was replaced by a heavy and confused expression. In the end, after reading all the words, she slowly took a step back. As if it had a mind of its own, the little black gas suddenly surrounded it and covered the mysterious lines of words again. Xiao Bai lowered her head slightly, speechless for a long time, sighed softly after a long time, and said softly, "So that's how it is. The ancient shaman tribe was actually destroyed like this. What should I do? Should I tell him these?" She seemed to suddenly encounter a great confusion in her heart, hesitating for a moment. The black gas that was blown away by the wind slowly gathered again. The words that were originally emitting brilliant golden light also slowly covered up again. Xiao Bai slowly turned around. A deep roar sounded behind her again. The dog deity statue rose back to its original position, covering up the secret. In the ancient cave, everything seemed to have returned to its original calmness. Xiao Bai's figure slowly walked out. She walked very slowly and seemed to have a lot of thoughts in her mind. However, under the illumination of the bright flame, her figure still disappeared from the cave. Silence descended upon the cave once more. After an unknown period of time, the ancient statue of the dog deity silently stared at everything in the cave. Its eyes reflected light, appearing so profound. Suddenly, the body that had been lying on the ground moved. The young Miao priest carefully climbed up, looked towards the entrance of the cave. It was quiet there. There was no movement. Obviously, the mysterious woman in white had left. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. His tense body slowly relaxed. With a wry smile, he said in a low voice, "That was close. If it weren't for my clan's self-isolation divine art, I wouldn't have been able to hide from her." Then his eyes suddenly blazed, abruptly turned around, looked at the dog deity statue. In the Meow tribe, deities had always been revered, especially this statue that had been worshipped since ancient times, this young man from Young. Not to mention touching the statue. Even looking straight at it was extremely rare because according to the tribe's rules, it was also an act of great disrespect. Just that right now his eyes reflected the raging flames. His body also seemed to start heating up. He stared at the statue. The statue's eyes also seemed to stare at him. Then, as if a huge, invisible force suddenly drove behind him, the young priest clenched his teeth, step by step walked towards the statue. The ancient statue's eyes reflected the figure that was getting closer and closer, and it seemed to carry a trace of sadness. Finally, he walked in front of the statue and slowly raised his trembling hands. He paused and paused in midair, but in the end he still stretched them out. The expression on his face seemed to be in pain and struggle, but it was more like he was being roasted and tortured by a flame. Just that the hands, in the end, did not retract, touched the statue's eyes. Instantly, a deep rumble sounded again. The entire cave started to tremble again. The statue once again slowly sank into the ground. The mysterious stone wall was right before his eyes. The young priest's eyes emitted a fanatical flame. He could not bear it any longer. Rushed forward, waved his hands. Immediately the black gas dispersed. The golden light once again slowly appeared, illuminating his face. The ancient words and pictures seemed to have a bewitching meaning, appeared one by one in front of his eyes. The expression on his face was like drinking wine, revealing an indescribable ecstasy and satisfaction. Even his hands were trembling. With a trembling hand, he gently touched the patterns on the mysterious stone wall and chanted something in a low voice. With great joy, he seemed to be able to see through the words and patterns. He was so engrossed in it that he was so happy that he forgot everything else. He even forgot and did not notice that at the bottom of the pattern there was a small cloud of black gas that seemed to be one with the surrounding darkness and did not dissipate. The golden words, the brilliant pictures, seemed to have completely occupied his mind. Beside him, the dog deity statue that only had its head left on the ground. Its eyes still seemed so deep, but at this moment, under the flames and the brilliant golden light on the stone wall, the young priest's figure reflected in its eye sockets. Other than the initial trace of deep sorrow, the eyes that had experienced the vicissitudes of life seemed to have an additional deep sorrow. Chapter 453. At the foot of Qingyun Hill, outside Heyong City, on the ancient path in the wilderness, Tanizka was still holding that immortal guide bamboo canopy, fluttering in the wind, swaggering on the ancient path. Walking shoulder to shoulder with him was Ghostly. Behind them were Xiao Huan and Wild Dog Taoist. The four of them unhurriedly walked, getting further and further away from Heyong City. Xiao Huan looked at Ghostly's back. Her expression was strange. A few times she wanted to speak, but stopped. Finally, she could not hold it in, walked a few steps to Ghostly, pulled his sleeve. The monkey Xiao Hui on Ghostly's shoulder, with a sound turned over, grinned at Xiao Huan. For some reason, Xiao Huan, under the monkey's gaze, blushed slightly. After a moment, Ghostly looked over, looking at his expression. It was still very desolate, but compared to when they met in Heyong City, it was much better. Looking at Xiao Huan, Ghostly's face also revealed a warm smile, said, "What is it?" Xiao Huan had just mustered up her courage. In front of this man's faint smile, suddenly disappeared. For a moment she stuttered. Tanizka saw it, shook his head repeatedly. As for Wild Dog Taoist, who was standing behind, his expression also did not look good. ZZ. At this moment of slight awkwardness, it was the monkey Xiao Hui who laughed the loudest. Xiao Huan's face turned even redder, stared at it fiercely, but Xiao Hui naturally did not care about this little girl's stare. On the contrary, it followed suit. Its three eyes widened at the same time, stared back at Xiao Huan. Xiao Huan lightly exclaimed, "Step back." As the saying goes, two fists cannot fight against four hands. Seemed like it was the same logic with the eyes. Even if you're facing a monkey, as long as the monkey had one more eye than you most likely would not be able to defeat it. Xiao Hui was overjoyed, jumped up, and almost rolled on Ghost Li's shoulder. While flipping, it stuck out its tongue at Xiao Huan and made a face. Xiao Huan spat at that gray monkey, but even so, it also resolved the formless awkwardness. She coughed once, but did not look at Ghost Li. Her eyes drifted here and there, softly said, "You, where do you intend to go in the future?" Wild Dog Taoist, who was standing behind, looked even uglier. Ghost Li was slightly surprised, did not immediately reply. After a moment, he turned and glanced at Zhou Yixian. Zhou Yixian nodded, said, "Yes, I also wanted to ask you, what plans do you have for the future?" Ghost Li was silent for a moment, said, "To be honest, I also don't know. These few days I am indebted to Senior's guidance. Although I'm still sad about Teacher and Shenyang's passing, but I've gotten over it. I only hate myself for not fulfilling my filial piety to them earlier." Tanis Ka sighed, said, "You say that. It means you haven't really accepted it. But humans are not plants. Sometimes, even if you know the truth, your state of mind is not controlled by yourself. This is not your fault. But the dead are gone. You don't have to be too sad. If not, your teacher and Shenyang's spirit in heaven will not be happy. Better think more about the future." Ghostly nodded, pondered for a moment. A dazed expression flashed past his face. With some bitterness, he said, "For these 10 years, I have been running around, just to save one person, but the few opportunities one had were all for naught. The world is so big, I am really at my wit's end." Tanis Ka's countenance changed slightly. His eyes turned and glanced at Xiao Huan, seemed hesitant, then indifferently said, "Your encounter, I've also heard of it, about that Miss Biao." Ghost Li's body shook, hurriedly turned and said, "Senior, don't tell me you have any idea?" In his agitation, his voice seemed to tremble. Tani, who was standing beside, was surprised, looked at Tanis Isian, only to see him lightly cough twice, said, "Old man is also powerless." Xiao Huan couldn't help but ask Ghost Li, "You, what happened to that Miss Biao?" Ghost Li was silent. Before he could speak, Tanis Ka glared at Xiao Huan, sternly said, "What is a child like you know? Don't interrupt." Xiao Huan was surprised. Tanis Ka usually did not act respectfully, although he often joked with her, quarreled with her, but it was rare to see him speaking so seriously. She was stunned. Ghost Li heaved a long sigh, full of desolation. Tanis Ka's eyes flashed a complicated expression, suddenly beckoned to Ghost Li, said, "Come to the side, I have something to say to you." Speaking, he left Xiao Huan and Wild Dog Taoist, walked to the far side of the ancient path. Ghost Li's face was desolate, slowly followed. Xiao Huan then regained her senses, saw the two of them were already standing far away. Tanis Ka frowned tightly, whispering something to Ghost Li, and following Tanis Ka's words, Ghost Li's expression also gradually changed, first surprised, and then a glimmer of hope in the blankness, but clearly this hope was not very big. His expression gradually turned gloomy again. Instead, Tanis Ka kept on talking, looking at him. It seemed like an elder teaching the younger generation earnestly. Xiao Huan's lips curled up. Suddenly a nameless fire ignited in her heart. Fiercely kicked a stone under her feet. That stone immediately flew up, drew an arc in the air, and hit Wild Dog Taoist's feet. For some reason, Wild Dog Taoist was also in a daze and did not notice this stone. Immediately he was hit till he quivered, his brows frowning. Xiao Huan looked over. In her anger, she also felt embarrassed, walked over and softly said, "Priest, are you all right?" Wild Dog Taoist, under her gaze, immediately shook his head, quietly said, "Nothing, I am all right." Xiao Huan nodded, and then her eyes again landed on Ghost Li. Her eyes moved. A few thoughts, many expressions, appeared on her face one by one. Wild Dog Taoist watched Xiao Huan, quietly hung his head. Suddenly Xiao Huan's voice was heard. "Oh right, priest, I want to ask you one thing." Wild Dog Taoist looked up and said, "What?" Xiao Huan frowned slightly, said, that Bai Yao lady, what is going on? Why does Ghostly Big Brother look so troublesome?" Wild Dog Taoist hesitated for a moment. Honestly speaking, he was not a core figure in Ghost King's sect, and only heard some rumors about Bai Yao, but he naturally knew the cause of the matter, just that it was a long story. For the moment, he did not know where to start. While he was thinking, he said, "This matter is a long story. I heard it was 10 years ago." Speaking till here, he suddenly sensed something and stopped. Xiao Huan's reaction was the same as him. Somewhat surprised, turned and looked on the ancient path behind them. A faint purple light suddenly descended from the sky, gently landed, like duckweed slowly landing. After a few turns, it was Jean Pinger's charming face. Xiao Huan was first shocked, and then overjoyed, softly called out, "Pinger's sister." After speaking, she ran over. Jean Pinger saw Xiao Huan. Her face was also full of smiles, pulled Xiao Huan's hand, and scrutinized her carefully, smiled and said, "Good sister, every time I see you, I feel that you are getting prettier, really changing every day. I wonder how many men have been mesmerized by you." Xiao Huan did not expect Jean Pinger to say this, although she already knew that this sister was definitely not a dignified lady, but after hearing it, her face also turned red, angrily said, "What mesmerized men, really? It's not easy to meet you, and you are already teasing me." Jean Pinger's eyes were full of smiles, stretched out her hand, and lightly pinched Xiao Huan's delicate face, smiled and said, "Little girl, even I am almost mesmerized by you. You still don't want to behave?" Xiao Huan's face turned even redder, but her relationship with Jean Pinger was extremely good. It was rare to meet her once. She really could not bear to let go, pulled Jean Pinger's hand, and started to ask questions, just that occasionally she would sneak a glance at Ghostly. Ghostly and Zhou Yixian naturally had long seen Jean Pinger's sudden arrival. Both of them did not expect to meet her at this place at this time, with Ghostly's skills. Naturally, he discovered Jean Pinger's tracks earlier than Xiao Huan and Wild Dog Taoist. He even knew that Jean Pinger had landed from the direction of Heyang City behind them. And in the direction of Heyang City, there seemed to be another trace of spiritual energy, but it was too far away. He could not see it clearly. But to be together with Jean Pinger, most likely it would not be someone from some big sect. Naturally, it would be someone from the evil sect. With that thought, Ghostly also did not have the intention to investigate further. Instead, Jean Pinger chatted with Xiao Huan for a while, pulled Xiao Huan's hand, and walked over to them. "Gongzi, how have you been?" Jean Pinger's voice also seemed to carry some tenderness. Hearing it made one's bones melted. Xiao Huan, who was standing beside her, secretly looked up at Ghostly, but saw Ghostly's indifferent face, as if that seductive voice had no effect on him. For some reason, Xiao Huan's lips secretly revealed a smile. Since Jean Pinger came over to greet him, Ghostly nodded slightly and said, "What a coincidence." Jean Pinger smiled and said, "After Southern Border parting, we really haven't seen each other for a long time." She was halfway through her words. Suddenly, from the corner of her eyes, she saw the three-eyed monkey Xiao Hui on Ghost Li's shoulder, making a face at her. That day in Southern Border, she was teased by this monkey. Immediately her face darkened, but Xiao Hui did not seem to be afraid at all. Looking at Jean Pinger's expression, it instead became happier, bared its teeth at Jean Pinger, with the intention of provoking her. Jean Pinger's mind was in a mess, and then woke up with a start, secretly scolded herself. How could she have such weak control over a monkey? She stared hatefully at Xiao Hui and looked away. A smile reappeared on her face, spoke to Ghostly. "Speaking of which, that day Gongzi you left me alone and disappeared. You are really heartless." Chapter 454. Ghostly faintly said, "If I do not abandon you, I'm afraid I will not be able to walk out of that 10,000 great mountains." Jean Pinger exclaimed, covered her mouth and laughed, obviously did not mind the sarcasm in Ghostly's words, said, "Gongzi really knows how to joke." Ghostly looked deeply at her, said, "But you being able to come out from that subdue devil ancient cave is really out of my expectation." A glint flashed across Jean Pinger's eyes, smiled and said, "Why? Gongzi doesn't want me to come out." Ghostly faintly smiled, neither nodded nor shook his head, only turned and said to Tanis Ka, "Senior, you and I are considered fated. The world is so vast. These 10 years we have met several times. As for what you said to me just now, No matter if it is possible or not, I will still have to try, he sighed and said. It is better than having no hope at all. Tanniska nodded, said, It is good that you know this. That method is not common sense. Nobody has tried it before. It was just that when I was roaming the four seas, I heard it by chance. You better look out for yourself. Ghostly bowed to Tanniska, said, Since it is so, Junior will leave now. We will meet again if we are fated. Speaking, his figure moved, looked like he was about to leave. Suddenly a shout was heard beside him. Wait, you wait. Ghostly was surprised, turned, and looked at Xiao Huan. Xiao Huan was standing beside Jean Pinger, hesitating to speak. Tanniska saw it, suddenly shook his head, sighed, turned, and walked away. What is it, Xiao Huan? Ghostly seemed to feel something. His expression softened, gently asked. Xiao Huan's lips trembled slightly. Seemed to want to say something, but in the end, nothing came out. Jean Pinger stood beside, holding her hand. Right now frowned slightly. That fair and delicate little hand was trembling slightly in her palm. She turned and looked at Xiao Huan. That little girl called out to Ghostly, but after a long while, the atmosphere turned awkward, but she still did not speak. Jean Pinger sighed softly, pulled Xiao Huan behind her, smiled and said, Gongzi, where are you going? Ghostly was silent for a moment. His eyes drifted past that slender figure blocked by Jean Pinger. His eyes seemed to have some warmth, but his voice turned cold. Indifferently said, I treat the four seas as my home. Where would I have a fixed place? Jean Pinger said again, What a good saying. The four seas are your home. You really have the aspiration of a man. But may I ask, Gongzi, do you still have any worries in your heart? Xiao Huan's body seemed to suddenly stiffen, but did not move, still hiding behind Jean Pinger. Just that Jean Pinger could feel that tension in her hands. Ghostly's voice seemed to turn colder, said, No. After saying that, he took a deep look at the body that had suddenly stiffened. The corners of his mouth twitched, but after a moment, he concealed the strange expression on his face. He turned around and walked a few steps away. He paused for a moment, as if he was a little hesitant, but in the end, he did not turn back. After a moment, he turned into a gray light and shot up into the sky. West wind, ancient path. The wilderness was silent. The atmosphere was heavy. Xiao Huan had not spoken and did not come out from behind Jean Pinger. But the hand that was holding Jean Pinger seemed to sink into her flesh. Wild Dog Taoist's face turned ugly, stepped forward and wanted to say something, but did not say anything. Finally, it was Tanniska who coughed, walked up, laughed dryly, and said, Xiao Huan, that fate is determined by heaven. We have to be more open-minded. Before he finished, Jean Pinger suddenly raised her eyebrows, stared at Tanniska and Wild Dog Taoist. Both of them felt their eyes were burning, couldn't help but took a step back. Jean Pinger snorted, said with a cold face, Both of you are not any good either. Quickly go away. Tanniska and Wild Dog Taoist glanced at each other. Jean Pinger turned around and hugged Xiao Huan in her arms. Xiao Huan finally could not hold it in any longer and burst into tears. Jean Pinger gently patted her back and softly said, Silly child, what is there to cry about? Let me tell you, all men in this world are bad. Suddenly Xiao Huan said with a sobbing tone, No, he is not. He is a good person. Jean Pinger felt angry and funny at the same time, said, Yes, he's a good person. Look at you only for a while. Your eyes are all red from crying. While speaking, she carefully wiped Xiao Huan's tears. Tanniska shook his head and muttered, Good fellow, old man, I have raised her for more than 10 years. In the end, no one speaks up for me when I'm not a good person, and instead say others are good. Really, before he finished, Jean Pinger's murderous glare swept over. Tanniska immediately swallowed back his words. At night, because Xiao Huan was not in a good mood, they did not travel far. Jean Pinger was also passing by this place, and coincidentally found Xiao Huan and the rest here, so she came down to meet them. Initially, she wanted to meet and chat with them before continuing on their journey, but now she was worried about Xiao Huan's bad mood and delayed. But in the evening, after Jean Pinger consoled and teased, Xiao Huan's face finally revealed a smile again. Jean Pinger again secretly whispered to her, not knowing what she said. Anyway, in Tannis and Wild Dog Taoist's eyes, that seductive Jean Pinger was leaning beside Xiao Huan. whispering something to her, making Xiao Huan, who had just recovered her emotions, blush and pale, occasionally speaking coquettishly. Most likely it was not anything good. After talking for a while, Jean Pinger stood up, stretched, and said, "All right, I should go." As if she had expected Jean Pinger to leave. Xiao Huan's face did not show any surprise, but her reluctance to leave was obvious. Holding Jean Pinger's hand, she quietly said, "Sister, when can we meet again?" Jean Pinger smiled, said, "Don't worry, the world is big. Us two sisters will always be fated to meet." Xiao Huan, nodded, said, "Then I will send you off." Jean Pinger said, "All right." Then holding her hand, walked out. Taniska and Wild Dog Taoist were eager for this woman to leave quickly, did not stop her. After a distance, the two girls chattered again. Jean Pinger smiled and said, "All right, let's stop here, or else your grandfather will scold me again." Xiao Huan nodded, suddenly seemed to remember something, hesitated for a moment, said, "Sister, I remember you, and here in the same sect, right?" Jean Pinger was surprised, said, "Yes, why?" Xiao Huan quietly said, That Bai Yao lady, what is going on? Can you tell me?" Jean Pinger sighed, said, "Sister, not that I purposely scolded you, although that man is different from the others. Even I also look at him differently, different from other men, but I still advise you, forget it. His life is full of ups and downs. If you go up to him, it will only be hard on yourself." Xiao Huan shook her head, said, I did not really think of anything. I just want to know more about him." Jean Pinger shook her head slightly, sighed, after a moment, briefly narrated the past to Xiao Huan. As Xiao Huan listened, her expression gradually turned ugly, especially at the end. That Bai Yao's soul was imprisoned in the Hehuan bell, ghostly roamed the world to find a way to release the soul. Her face almost turned black. Jean Pinger naturally noticed the change in Xiao Huan's expression, but thought it was a young girl's feelings. Softly said, "All right, it is roughly like this, sister. Listen to sister. Don't put these things in your heart. Your future road is still long." Xiao Huan seemed to be absent-minded, her expression ugly, nodded at Jean Pinger, said, "I know." After speaking, she quickly left. Jean Pinger was surprised. After a while, suddenly quarreling sounds were heard. It seemed Xiao Huan and Zhou Yixian were quarreling again. Jean Pinger could not help but laugh. Since she could quarrel, most likely the little girl's spirit was better. After all, she was still young. She shook her head gently, seemed to feel that she was getting old, but very quickly, this damned thought was kicked out of her mind. Turning into a purple halo, she leapt up, rode the wind. Almost an hour later, she had already landed on the quiet Heong city wall, just that there was already a person standing there, his figure tall, hands clasped behind his back, dressed in Taoist robes. It was Taoist Song Song. Jean Pinger smiled coquettishly at him, said, "Priest, I have troubled you to wait for so long. Really sorry." Taoist Song Song unhurriedly turned around, indifferently said, "You have been delayed for a long time." Jean Pinger's expression did not change, smiled, and said, "Anyway, sect head also instructed us to be careful. There is no need to rush for results, isn't it?" Her smile was coquettish. In it indistinctly there was an unexplainable deep meaning. Softly laughed and said, "Or could it be, priest, you have an impatient state of mind to return to Qingyun Hill, which is right before your eyes?" Taoist Song Song coldly snorted, did not speak, only turned and gazed into the distance. Jean Pinger smiled, walked to his side, followed his gaze, and also looked over. In the distance, that towering Qingyun Hill, indistinctly visible in the lingering clouds. Chapter 455. Majestic Fox Mountain, Ghost King sect deep in the blood pool. The situation of the four divinities' blood formation in the blood pool was different from a few days ago. The four huge spiritual beasts seemed to have completely lost their spirituality and were only hanging onto their last breaths in the blood pool. The dark red light screen that enveloped their bodies also became weak. If one did not look carefully, it would be hard to see. One could only see the few remaining threads of spiritual energy being sucked away by the hidden dragon cauldron in the sky. And in contrast to the four spiritual beasts' dispirited and powerless state, the entire blood pool seemed to be affected by an invisible, huge force on the vast water surface. Everywhere seemed to be boiling, bubbles kept popping and bursting, making muffled sounds. At the same time, the blood pool, which was originally motionless, actually started to spin on its own. A few strange lights shot down from the sky, shone on the blood pool. Wherever it passed, the blood pool surged. In the air, a thick stench of blood permeated. On the hidden dragon cauldron, the last remaining hideous deity image, right now also turned into the same color as the ancient cauldron, the entire hidden dragon cauldron now looked beyond recognition, no longer had the simple and unadorned feeling. On the contrary, after absorbing the enormous spiritual energy, the strange power in the ancient cauldron seemed to be slowly triggered out. Floating alone in the void, the hidden dragon cauldron overlooked everything, as if everything was under its feet, crawling towards it. And in the huge space surrounding the hidden dragon cauldron, there were indistinct sounds of wind and thunder resonating with it. The sounds of wind and thunder were indistinctly discernible. Looking carefully, one could see the strange lights around the hidden dragon cauldron at the same time flickering, like a person's panting, appearing and disappearing, extremely strange. An invisible force seemed to be in this huge space, quietly nurturing, and also like a deity which had slept for thousands of years, about to awaken. That surging and strange force, like a wave, rampaged above the blood pool, and scrupulously crashing against the surrounding stone walls. Looking at all this strange scene, Ghost King and Mr. Ghost stood side by side, did not speak. However, it was clear that there was not a single trace of fear or retreat from the two of them. After a long while, Ghost King let out a deep laugh and said, "It is indeed powerful. The four divinities' blood formation has not been formed yet, and it actually has such power." Mr. Ghost did not immediately reply. After a moment of silence, said, "Sect Head, the commotion a few days ago was indeed caused by this four divinities' blood formation. I failed to protect the formation. Please punish me." Ghost King waved his hand, did not look at Mr. Ghost, stepped forward, his eyes still on the hidden dragon cauldron, said, "Just a small matter. Don't mention it. This formation's power is too strong. Not to mention you. Even I did not expect it. A moment of mistake is unavoidable." Mr. Ghost hesitated for a moment, said, "Thank you, Sect Head, for your magnanimity, but—" Ghost King turned around and said, "But what?" Mr. Ghost met Ghost King's gaze. Suddenly his heart was shaken, felt that Ghost King's eyes were unusually piercing. With his own skills, he also felt unable to stare at it. A few thoughts flashed past his mind like lightning, but fortunately his face was covered by the black veil. Others could not see his expression, at least from his accent. It was still calm. Just like Sect Head said, this four divinities' blood formation is extremely powerful, and as the day of formation completion nears, this spiritual power will only become stronger and stronger. Although I've already laid down 18 restrictions around this blood pool, but honestly speaking, I am also not completely confident, especially on that last day when the formation is completed. It will definitely be an earth-shattering scene. Whether these restrictions I laid down will be of use or not, it is really hard to say. I'm afraid if we're not prepared, some of our sect disciples outside will most likely be implicated. Ghost King coldly laughed, said, "So what?" Mr. Ghost paused for a moment, looked at Ghost King, was silent for a moment, said, "I'm only reminding Sect Head. If necessary, we can let some of the weaker disciples leave the mountain in advance." A sharp glint flashed in Ghost King's eyes, snorted and said, "No need." Mr. Ghost did not speak. Ghost King coldly said, "This heaven and earth unusual formation, gathering the essence of the four spirits, and nourishing it with blood and energy. Only with blood and evil energy can the Azura door be opened, even if some people are buried along with it. It is not a big deal." Mr. Ghost slowly nodded his head, said, "Yes, I understand." Ghost King laughed, his demeanor arrogant, turned and inhaled deeply. His eyes again landed on the hidden dragon cauldron. Watching the incessantly changing cauldron body, his eyes seemed to be intoxicated. And behind him, Mr. Ghost's eyes seemed to be deep in thought, but that pair of eyes was not fanaticism, but ice-cold calmness and sobriety. Qingyan Hill, Long Shou Peak. Long Shou Peak in the Qingyan Seven Branches was second only to Tongtian Peak, tall and steep, towering and towering. This night the moon was dark and the wind was strong. In a hidden forest behind Long Show Peak, a small path meandered forward, winding around the forest. The cold night breeze blew. Two figures, one tall, one short, descended from the sky, landed on this small path. It was Taoist Song Song and Jean Pinger. This place was far from the front mountain Long Show Peak, where the group of disciples resided. Usually very few people would come here in the dead of the night. It was even quieter. Taoist Song Song's eyes were cold, glanced at the surroundings, and then looked up at the sky, suddenly snorted. Jean Pinger looked at him with interest, said, "What is it, priest? You look like you are very angry." Taoist Song Song coldly said, "This group of disciples are becoming more and more useless. Wasted old man's efforts." Jean Pinger became curious, said, "What is it?" Taoist Vasp Kalo snorted, walked along the small path, at the same time coldly said, "This back mountain heaven's secret important place, although it looks no different from other places, but the seniors and ancestors had left in order for generations. Each branch disciples must guard it strictly. Right now, it is only the second watch period, and there's already no one to be seen. Really a bunch of trash." Jean Pinger smiled and said, "Isn't this convenient for us to do things? You should be happy." Taoist Song Song coldly snorted again, but there was clearly no joy on his face. Instead, his expression was extremely ugly, striding forward. Jean Pinger followed behind him, smiled, and said, "Actually, you can't blame those Qing Yun sect disciples. As far as I know, in the past 1,000 years, Qing Yun sect had only opened the 7 mountain peaks heaven seal a few times, and it was only during the recent demon beast calamity that beast deity was really too strong, so they had no choice but to open it once. If it was anyone else, not using it for such a long time, in addition to you elders keeping these things a secret, the ordinary disciples would only think it is just an ordinary forbidden place with nothing. Even if they slacked off for a few times, it is also normal." She smiled coquettishly, said a Taoist Song Song, "Furthermore, you are leading the way. I heard that for the past few decades, Qing Yun Hill's affairs, especially these defensive matters, were all handled by you. Those patrolling disciples could not discover us. We can't blame them. Don't you think so?" Master Song Song's expression was still ugly. To him, every grass and every tree on this Qing Yun Hill were different from other places not so long ago. He was the master of this hill. The past path, was it really not wrong? Taoist Song Song suddenly shook his head, as if to shake off some thoughts, strided forward. Jean Pinger looked at his back, seemed to understand that Taoist state of mind, just that she was obviously not a good person overflowing with kindness. Her eyes revealed a sense of gloating. The corners of her lips curled up, making her look even more beautiful and gentle. Her footsteps also seemed to be light. Leisurely followed behind Taoist Song Song, following the small path towards the depths of Long Show Valley Rear Mountain. This small path was extremely deep. After winding for a long time, there was still no end in sight, and as the path went deeper, the weeds by the roadside increased, gradually covering the small path. Evidently no one had walked here for a long time. The vegetation was lush. Watching the weeds by the roadside gradually growing to the small path, Taoist Song Song's expression turned uglier, looked rather ashen. Jean Pinger did not speak to him anymore, only follow behind. Watching Taoist Song Song's tall back, she suddenly had a feeling this man might not only be a traitor who betrayed the good faction. But even so, who would care the Taoist Song Song now if he was discovered by his former sect members? Most likely it would be a life and death struggle, and it was just 10 years ago he was still the most powerful figure in the world's #1 sect. Who would have thought of this? Life encounters, always full of twists and turns. Yet not knowing in the unseen world, was it the mortals themselves who controlled it, or was it decided by heaven's will? Therefore there was the so-called heavens while toying with man. Along the way, Jean Pinger could not help but think of Xiao Huan, whom she had just met not long ago. That young lady who had a predestined fate with her. Looked young, but also seemed to be trapped by love. Thinking of Xiao Huan, her expression softened, with some warmth. Maybe only that young lady was the only one whom she could open her heart to. Maybe in the future, if there was a chance, roaming the world with Xiao Huan would not be bad. A faint smile slowly surfaced on Jean Pinger's lips, but this smile disappeared in a flash. She stopped because Taoist Song, who was in front of her, also stopped. Allowed a long breath. Listening to his tone, it seemed to be mixed with a very strange feeling, slowly said, "This is it, Qing Yun Sect Long Shou Valley Heaven Seal." The small path finally reached the end. Jean Pinger walked up, was stunned for a moment. Her face revealed a puzzled expression, turned and looked at Taoist Song, said, "What? This is the Heaven Seal." Taoist Song was expressionless, only nodded his head lightly. What appeared in front of them was not some resplendent celestial weapon, nor was it a dignified and majestic pavilion. Before coming here, Jean Pinger had thought about it countless of times, but no matter what, she had never guessed the legendary Heaven Seal would actually be like this. Chapter 456. In front of her was an ordinary earth pit. If there was any difference, it would be that this earth pit was bigger, deeper, a huge earth pit, but looking at the overgrown weeds in the pit, the mountain soil had collapsed, no matter how she looked at it. It looked like an ordinary earth pit. How could it be something related to the world-famous Zhu Xian sword formation? Jean Pinger for a moment found it hard to accept, but Taoist Song had already jumped in, stood at the bottom of the pit, waved to Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger sighed, and also jumped in. Jumping into the pit, Jean Pinger stepped on the solid soil at the bottom of the pit. Because she was surrounded by soil, Jean Pinger could smell the unique smell of soil. She looked up and found that the pit was actually quite deep. She didn't notice anything when she looked down, but when she reached the bottom, she found that the edge of the pit was actually as high as a person and a half. The soil in the pit was not as hard and easy to walk on as it was on the small path. It was slightly soft, but fortunately there was no wind or rain these few days, so the soil was dry and hard. It was not deep or shallow, but it was inevitable that there were potholes. Jean Pinger followed behind Taoist Song, walked deeper into the pit. The terrain here was inclined inwards. The further down they went, the more they looked at the surrounding trees and the distant mountain peaks, the more they felt that those things were taller and taller, and gradually a feeling of insignificance surfaced in their hearts. This strange feeling reverberated in Jean Pinger's heart, made her really uncomfortable, but luckily, although this earth pit was big, it was not boundless. Very soon, Taoist Song stopped. Jean Pinger also stopped. Right now, they were in the middle of this huge earth pit. The surrounding soil was messy. In the middle, a few piles of soil were piled together, forming a small mound. On top of it was a 3 chi long, 1 chi wide cylindrical roundwood, slanted into the small mound of soil. Taoist Song silently stared at the roundwood, did not speak, but a strange glint flashed past his eyes. After a moment, without a word, he was about to move forward. But at this moment, suddenly Jean Pinger called out from behind him, "Priest, wait." Taoist Song turned and looked at Jean Pinger, said, "What is it?" Jean Pinger said, "Please allow me to look at the surrounding scenery." Taoist Song was surprised, did not speak. Jean Pinger instead looked up, slowly turned her body. Although this place was already at the top of Longshou Peak, but Longshou Peak's perilous peaks were still towering much higher than this place, and not just one. Jean Pinger stood in the middle of the earth pit, saw the east, north, west 3 sides at high peaks. Looking from the bottom of the pit, those steep peaks seemed to be slanted like 3 fingers wanting to join, and her own pit was right in the center. Right now the night was hanging low, the firmament like ink. Jean Pinger, after looking for long, she felt the sky was falling, her vision blurred. But she was after all not an ordinary person. After calmed her mind, her expression returned to normal, but her expression after her eyes, her looked of her eyes. She looked at the pit, her eyes of the earth. She was after her. She was after she looked at. Taoist Song, who was standing beside, frowned slightly, but in his eyes there was a hint of admiration. After a while, Jean Pinger heaved a long sigh, clapped her hands, and said, "Good idea, good foresight. Which generation of your Qing Yun sect founder took a fancy to this spiritual cave? It is really a unique divine eye. The peaks, spiritual energy all gathered here. And with 3 peaks gathered, it did not leak out. But what is more impressive is this 1,000-year-old mysterious wood. It looks blunt and edgeless, but just happened to pierce into the spiritual cave's weakest point, like hitting a snake's weak point. Using the mysterious wood's dry energy, it suppressed the entire mountain's spiritual energy. Amazing, amazing. She clapped and praised, but it was from the bottom of her heart. Taoist Song Song looked at her, his expression unknowingly eased. After a moment, he faintly said, "The one who observed the mountain's weather, excavated this cave, is our Qing Yun sect founder Qing Yun Zi. As for the senior who laid down the mysterious wood prohibition, there is no record. Some said it was Qing Yun Zi founder himself. Some also said it was actually Qing Yi founder who created the Zhu Xian sword formation." Jean Pinger nodded, said, "Actually, in the past, I did not have any good impression of Qing Yun sect, but after seeing it today, I feel that among your founders, there are really a lot of outstanding figures. I am far from them. Seems like under the great reputation, it is really not without merit." Taoist Song Song snorted. His face revealed a proud expression, said, "Qing Yun sect for thousands of years and below. How can it be compared to other small sects? As for our Qing Yun generations of founders, naturally even more." Halfway through his words, his voice suddenly trailed off. Until the end, his words became hoarse and inaudible. Jean Pinger quietly leapt down from the thousand-years mysterious wood. For some reason, she suddenly felt a sense of sadness in her heart, unwilling to look at Taoist Song Song's expression right now. This person who was deeply proud of Qing Yun was actually the main culprit who betrayed Qing Yun? A person, how could he be simply divided into good and evil to describe? In the pit, for a moment it was silent. Taoist Song Song's body from the back looked straight and tall, just that his expression seemed to be hidden in the silence and shadows, making one unable to see it clearly. After a long time, Taoist Song Song's voice was deep, unhurriedly said, "We have delayed for too long. Let's begin." Jean Pinger nodded, said, "What do you want to do, you say?" The mountain breeze blew gently. The surrounding dense trees swayed with the wind. The curtain of night hung low. Only that deep pit sounds could be heard incessantly. Continued for a while, suddenly stopped. A moment later, a muffled sound was heard. It was an object being thrown out of the pit, heavily falling on the small path beside the pit. Under the faint starlight, it was that thousand-years mysterious wood. After a while, clothes rustled. Jean Pinger and Taoist Song Song leapt up together. With their skills, they seemed to be exhausted. Obviously, to change this spiritual point energy channels, even a heaven seal method, was not an easy task. Jean Pinger's breathing calmed down, frowned, and asked Taoist Song Song, "Since we are here to destroy the heaven seal, if something happens in the future, Qing Yun sect can no longer use the Seven Mountain Peak spiritual energy to assist Zhu Xian sword formation, then can't we just pull out this thousand-years mysterious wood? Why is there a need to forcefully change the place where the energy channels converge? Isn't it superfluous?" Taoist Song Song shook his head, said, "This Qing Yun Hill is the world's blessed land. The spiritual energy is extremely rich. It is also because of this Qing Yun Zi founder valued this place. Only pulling out the thousand-years mysterious will only cause the spiritual energy to leak out. But firstly, the spiritual energy in this place is already extremely rich. Secondly, you see, there's still 3 peaks converging. The leakage of the spiritual energy is even more difficult. Only by changing the place where the energy channels converge, although it is only a slight shift, but as long as the spiritual energy converges away from this heaven-made, almost like an iron bucket of 3 peaks converging force, then with the help of the high mountain wind, it will slowly disperse. In the future, when someone uses the Zhu Xian sword formation, although the spiritual energy in Longsho Valley is still rich, but it will have dispersed all over the mountain. Unable to converge, he will also be at his wit's end. Jean Pinger then came to her senses, nodded and agreed, then asked, "Now that Longsho Valley Heaven Seal has been destroyed, what about the other 6 branches?" Taoist Song Song pondered for a moment, shook his head and said, "We can at most only destroy the remaining Sunset Peak, Return of the Wind Peak, Morning Sun Peak, 3 branches Heaven Seal. As for Tong Tian Peak, Big Bamboo Peak, Small Bamboo Peak, 3 branches, I'm afraid there is nothing we can do." Jean Pinger's curiosity was aroused, asked, "Why is that?" Taoist Song Song lightly said, Tong Tian Peak is Qing Yun's main branch. Its defense is the strictest. Let's not talk about it, but the spiritual energy in that place is not to be underestimated. When Zhu Xian Sword Formation is activated, it has always used Tong Tian Peak's spiritual energy as the main, the other 6 branches' spiritual energy as support. As the saying, pull one hair and the whole body will be affected, as long as there is any abnormal movement. My senior brother Daoxian with profound skills will most likely know, so it cannot be touched. He paused and said, I know the locations of the Sunset Peak, Return of the Wind Peak, Morning Sun Peak, 3 branches Heaven Seal. It should not be too difficult, but that Big Bamboo Peak, Small Bamboo Peak, 2 branches, I do not know the location of the Heaven Seal. Jean Pinger curiously asked, Why is that? Taoist Song Song was silent for a moment, said Small Bamboo Peak has always only accepted female disciples. The entrance is strictly guarded. The head Shui Wei is also hot-tempered. She will not even let any random person enter the mountain, not to mention such an important matter like Heaven Seal. As for Big Bamboo Peak, I've always not been on good terms with Tian Bui, Suru couple. Tian Bui is also an arrogant person. His disciples are not many and not up to much, but he still hides and does not let anyone know. Jean Pinger found it funny, but then frowned and said, Then we have only damaged 4 Meridian's Heaven Seal. Won't it be too little? Taoist Song Song shook his head, said, Not so, as far as I know. As long as more than half of Qing Yun's 7 branches have an accident, then the Heaven Seal prohibition will be completely useless, because the main peak Tong Tian Peak's spiritual energy is really too strong, and even has the intention to kill. It must be balanced by the other 6 branches' spiritual energy before it can work. 1 or 2 branches missing is still fine, but if at the same time 4 branches are missing, I'm afraid that Zhu Xian Sword Formation will be a problem. Jean Pinger carefully assessed Taoist Song Song from top to bottom, suddenly smiled and said, Priest, you are really far-sighted. These matters, I'm afraid it is not just a day or 2 in your heart. Taoist Song Song's face darkened, looked at Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger was still smiling, did not have the slightest intention to avoid his gaze. After a moment, it was Taoist Song Song who was the first to look away, without a word, turned and left the pit. Jean Pinger looked away, looked at her feet, saw that 1,000-years-old mysterious wood lying peacefully at the side of the small path. She smiled, stretched out her leg, and kicked the mysterious wood into the weeds, and then walked towards the direction where Taoist Song Song left. Behind her, that mysterious big pit seemed to be the same as usual, just an ordinary big pit. Chapter 457. Mount Meru, Tianyin Temple. The precipitous mountain path meandered and stretched out between the mountains. Like in the past, under the warm sunshine, it was still crowded, numerous devout believers walking towards the temple to pay their respects and worship the deity in their hearts. Tianyin Temple monks were scattered all around, receiving the commoners who came up at some dangerous places on the cliffs. Usually a few monks stood there, just in case. At the same time, the reception monks were at the mountain gate with a smile on their faces, welcoming the people coming and going, a peaceful scene. Tianyin Temple Abbot Pu Hong Master's disciple Fa Xiang right now was also standing behind the mountain gate, watching the people coming and going. With his status of cultivation, he already did not need to do these homework, but he was kind-hearted. Often when he saw his fellow sect monks were busy because of the crowd, he would come over to help. This day was also the same. But on this day, he seemed to be in a trance and uneasy, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. Looking at the pious faces that flashed in front of him, he just put his palms together and chanted Ba with his head lowered, until a figure suddenly walked out from the crowd and stood in front of him. Fa Xiang looked up and was immediately stunned. Clearly he did not expect to see this person before him, following which a smile appeared on his face, said, "We meet again, patron." The person was ghostly. He was dressed in a gray long robe, standing among the commoners who came to pay their respects. He seemed inconspicuous. The only thing that stood out was probably that active gray monkey beside him. Ghostly looked somewhat haggard, although he was not in low spirits, but he did not seem to be in high spirits. He only smiled at Fa Xiang and said, "Fa Xiang, senior brother, I will have to trouble you to inform. I have some matters to attend to and wish to pay a visit to Master Puhong. Fa Xiang smiled and said, Zhang patron, don't worry. Teacher has already instructed that day. As long as you are here, no matter when or where, he will meet you. Please follow me. After speaking, Fa Xiang walked first, Ghostly quietly followed behind him. Along the way, Tianyin Temple was filled with palaces, incense wafting in the air. Not to mention it was filled with human figures shoulder to shoulder. Both of them walked for a while. Ghostly suddenly said to Fa Xiang, Fa Xiang's senior brother, you say above Qing Tian, is there really deities? Fa Xiang was silent for a moment, said, Patron, from my Buddhist point of view, deities are everywhere in the world, but the most important is still in each person's heart. Ghostly's face was indifferent, looked at the people around, quietly said, I do not understand. Fa Xiang quietly said, Almsgiver's life is full of ups and downs. The trials and tribulations are difficult. From what I see, if you wish to find liberation, the most important thing is to see through these two words in your heart. Ghostly was silent for a long time, did not speak. Fa Xiang also did not speak. Ghostly did not speak for a long time. Fa Xiang did not speak. Outside the meditation room, Fa Xiang nodded to Ghostly. Ghostly understood and stopped. Fa Xiang lightly knocked a few times on the door, said, Teacher, it is disciple Fa Xiang. Today, Ghostly patron has come up the mountain and is here to visit. Puhong Master's deep and gentle voice was heard in the meditation room, said, Invite Ghostly patron in. Fa Xiang gently pushed open the door, took a step back, stretched out his arm to Ghostly, quietly said, Patron, please. Ghostly nodded, walked into the meditation room. Fa Xiang followed behind him and casually closed the door. Puhong Master was meditating on the couch as usual. Seeing Ghostly, a kind smile appeared on his face, placed his palms together, and said, You are here, patron. Ghostly was rather respectful towards this Puhong Master. He did not dare to slight him, bowed deeply, said, Disciple has disturbed you. Puhong Master shook his head, smiled, and said, I have said it long ago, Tianyin Temple's doors are open to you. You can come any time. Furthermore, you are here. I am very happy. I wonder if you have anything for me? Ghostly hesitated for a moment, looked up at Puhong Master, said, Not to hide from Master, disciple coming here this time is indeed because I have something to ask Master. Puhong Master said, Patron, please speak your mind. Ghostly wanted to speak, but hesitated, seemed to find it difficult to speak, but eventually still said, May I ask, Master, in your temple, is there a treasure called Qian Kun reincarnation plate? Puhong Master was surprised. Fa Xiang, who was standing beside him, also revealed a surprised expression. Both of them looked at each other, and then Puhong Master nodded his head, said, That's right, our temple does have such a thing. Ghostly immediately became alert. Puhong Master saw his expression. His brows slightly frowned again, said, May I ask, Ghostly patron, why did you suddenly ask about this? Ghostly hesitated for a moment, said, Speaking of disciple situation, both of you also know, 10 years ago at Qingyun Hill, disciple had a friend who was seriously injured because of disciple. Until now, she is still unconscious. Puhong Master placed his palms together, said, Bai Yao Miss is a person who values friendship and loyalty. Old monk also greatly admires her. Ghostly said, For the past 10 years, I have traveled to the ends of the earth only to save Bai Yao, but heaven does not follow my wishes. Until now, there is still no progress. Speaking till here, although his expression did not change, but the sadness in his eyes could no longer be concealed. Ghostly was silent for a while, looked up at Puhong Master, said, Not to hide from Master, disciple's visit this time is because a few days ago, disciple heard a senior's words, said that Tianyin Temple has an unfathomable treasure, Qian Kun reincarnation plate. It has the ability to turn yin and yang, stabilize the soul. Maybe there is some hope to save Bai Yao. Therefore, I shamelessly came. Hope Master is benevolent. Lend this treasure to disciple. Once it is used up, disciple will definitely return it personally. Speaking till the end, Ghostly's lips trembled slightly, clearly agitated. His expression changed a few times, seemed hesitant, But then he took 2 steps forward, both hands clenched tightly, slowly knelt down in front of Puhong Master. Puhong Master was shocked, quickly stretched out his hand, anxiously said, "Patron must not be like this, quickly get up." Fa Xiang had already stepped forward to support Ghostly, helped him up. Puhong Master watched Ghostly for a long time. His face was still benevolent, but his eyes seemed to be drifting. Obviously, this treasure to him was not trivial. For a moment, he could not make a decision. After another moment, Puhong Master slowly placed his palms together, said, "Patron, old monk has a question to ask." Ghostly immediately said, "Master, please speak." Puhong Master's face looked solemn, said, "The matter of Qian Kuan reincarnation plate in Tianyin Temple. Other than my few senior and junior brothers in our temple, only my disciple Fa Xiang knows about it. This matter is rather secretive. I wonder which senior that Patron mentioned to tell you about this matter. Which expert is it?" Ghostly was stunned. For a moment, could not speak. After a long silence, he quietly said, "Master, please forgive me. It is not that disciple intentionally hid it. It is that when that senior told disciple about this matter, he specially instructed disciple not to reveal his identity. So, towards the end, his voice gradually became softer. Disappointment, anxiety indistinctly surfaced on his face. Evidently, he was also struggling fiercely in his heart, but in the end he did not say anything more. Puhong Master frowned, did not speak, lowered his head in contemplation. Ghostly saw Puhong Master's expression. His heart was even more anxious. Before he came to Tianyin Temple, he had indeed thought about this unheard-of treasure. If it really had such ability, then naturally it would be an exceptional treasure. Tianyin Temple treasuring, it was natural. Just that looking at Puhong Master and the rest's reactions, they did not seem to have any intention to reject, but unexpectedly, they seemed to be very concerned about the source of Ghostly's information. Ghostly naturally heard this information from Zhou Yixian on the ancient path outside Heyang City. The longer he knew Zhou Yixian, the more he felt this Jianghu fortune-teller who seemed to be full of nonsense to swindle money, was actually an unfathomable and profound master. Just that after Zhou Yixian told him this information, he repeatedly exhorted him not to reveal his identity. Right now, Ghostly's heart was like a few hot blood rushing against each other. On one side, it was the promise to Zhou Yixian. On the other side, it was the more important 10 years of long-cherished wish. For Beiyao, even if there was only a tiny bit of hope, he was really willing to give up anything to pursue. Right now, he was in a dilemma. For a moment, he was in agony. Luckily, at this moment, Puhong Master suddenly heaved a long sigh, said, "Forget it, no matter who it is that told you. You, after all, have a predestined fate with Puji Junior Brother. And speaking of which, this treasure is also Puji the Junior Brother." Puhong Master suddenly laughed bitterly, stopped talking, stood up from the couch, looked at Ghostly and placed his palms together, said, "Patron, please follow me. I will bring you to see someone." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.